declare open this public hearing of the Joint Standing Committee on the National Broadband Network. This hearing is being held at Parliament House and via video conference and teleconference. We're joined here today by Deputy Chair Ms Templeman, Deans Mr Mitchell and Senator Antic. We've received these from Senators Griff, McKim, Walsh, Sheldon and Mr Watts. The public hearing and a Hansard transcript of the proceedings is being made. The hearing is also being broadcast via the Australian Parliament House website. I remind witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence to the committee. The committee generally prefers evidence to be given in public, but under the Senate's resolutions, witnesses have the right to request to be heard in private session. If the witness objects to answering a question, the witness should state the ground upon which the objection is taken, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer having regard to the ground which is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request the answer be given in camera. Such a request may, of course, also be made at any other time. A witness called to answer a question for the first time should state their full name and capacity in which they appear, and witnesses should speak clearly to assist Hansard to record proceedings. Ask that all committee members and witnesses mute their microphones unless called to speak to ensure that all questions and responses can be heard. If members experience connection problems during the hearing, as always, please contact Secretariat directly or through the WhatsApp group. To assist Hansard, I remind speakers to state their names prior to speaking. Now, the formalities over. I welcome Ms Elizabeth Rogers, the Chief Executive Officer of Regional Arts New South Wales. I thank you, Ms Rogers, for taking the time to give evidence to the committee and for your submission. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses and evidence has been provided to you. For the record and for completeness, could you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today?
My name is Elizabeth Rogers and I'm the CEO of Regional Arts New South Wales.
Thank you, Ms Rogers. I invite you to make a short opening statement. At the conclusion of your remarks, I'll invite members of the committee to ask questions of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Regional Arts New South Wales is the peak body and service agency for arts and cultural development in regional New South Wales. We provide services to a network of 14 regional arts development organisations based in regional communities across the state. We call them RADOs. Our network of RADOs covers about 90% of New South Wales. Each RADO provides arts and cultural services across a number of local government areas in each region. They develop strategies, partnerships and arts projects across all genres that best meets the needs of their particular region. We are uniquely situated through our close relationship with our network to obtain first-hand grassroots information about all matters that impact on the arts and cultural sector across the state. For artists and arts organisations in regional New South Wales, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic was exacerbated by the 2019-20 bushfires that started in early spring in northern New South Wales and raged down to the Victorian border throughout the summer, destroying artists and arts workers' property and livelihoods, leaving in its wake devastation for regional communities that depend on seasonal tourist visitation. Attempts to restart were cut short as the pandemic restrictions came into force. Added to this, regional New South Wales had been in drought for a number of years, and this has particularly impacted the agricultural sector and its flow-on contribution to local economies. From the 13th to the 25th of May 2020, Regional Arts New South Wales surveyed regional artists and arts organisations in order to understand the impact of COVID-19 on their arts practice and business. This survey indicated that the two greatest impacts on this sector were social distancing and access to the internet or NBN. Artists and arts workers were working from home and attempting to adjust their business models to a world where the normal avenues of income generation were no longer available. The pivot to digital to generate online sales and audiences in businesses in lockdown was not feasible in regional New South Wales. Anecdotally, our Regional Arts New South Wales team members dispersed across the state know from our own experiences in moving all face-to-face meetings to Zoom how variable internet services are. Subsequently, Regional Arts New South Wales developed a second survey to unpack the issue of access to the internet NBN and to understand the reported frustrations of the regional arts sector. A survey titled NBN and Online Connectivity within the New South Wales Regional Arts Network was distributed via SurveyMonkey over the period the 18th of August to the 4th of September 2020. This survey was distributed throughout our network and by other New South Wales service organisations with regional members, including the Theatre Network New South Wales, Ausdance New South Wales and the Regional Conservatoriums Association. We asked questions about their location, whether they were a regional town, village or rural area, the overall availability of the internet, and were astonished that there were 11 options for regional New South Wales, connectivity and speed issues, and affordability and value. From the responses, 53% were received from those living in a regional town, 44% living in a village under 2,000 people or a rural area. 58% were from the arts organisations and 42% from individuals. It needs to be noted here that many people working in this sector are broadly characterised as arts workers. These include a high number of people who provide support services to artists and arts organisations, often self-employed casuals or contractors. As an example, a visual artist may have been commissioned to produce work for an exhibition in a regional gallery, but there will be a highly skilled team of people with a diverse range of skills employed to get the exhibition catalogued, hung, open and marketed. Theatre and performance venues also employ a large range of people for administration, front of house and backstage roles. This survey and our submission is limited to revealing the experiences of those from the arts and creative industry sector living and working in regional New South Wales. But I'm sure that the issues outlined in this survey can be replicated by small businesses operating in regional areas right across the country. A number of comments from the survey respondents were included in this submission as they most eloquently demonstrated some of the great frustrations that they are experiencing. The economic impact of this sector is frequently unrecognised, as these are small to micro businesses. However, the Bureau of Communications and Arts Research has released analysis showing cultural and creative activity contributed to $111.7 billion to Australia's economy in 2016-17. I thank the committee for the opportunity to represent the arts and creative industry sector from regional New South Wales in this public hearing.
Thank you for that opening statement, Ms. Rogers. For the benefit of the committee, we've got a reasonable amount of time with Ms. Rogers. Ms. Rogers, for your benefit, the committee is made up of coalition members, Labor members, members from independent and minor parties, and what we do so that we can be as assiduously fair as possible as we equally. My job, unfortunately, is to be the timekeeper, so I'll try and do that best I can, but I'm going to put the capable hands of Susan Templeman for the first 25 minutes, or just, and then we'll transition to Dr. Haynes representing the minor and independent parties, and then we'll round out with some questions from coalition members who on this occasion are myself and Senator Antic by telephone. I know this sounds ridiculous, but it just works well.
It's fine.
Okay, thank you. No, go on. Yes, so can you work out where my voice is coming from?
Yes, now I can. Now I can see you. It was a disembodied voice from the back of the room a moment ago. I'm not sure that I, in-depth knowledge of the NBN and its technology can actually take up the amount of time that is allocated to me, but I will do my best.
Yeah, you'll be
you.
surprised, Ms. Rogers.
Yeah, look, thank you. Your submission paints a comprehensive picture, and in fact, as I read it, a lot of it resonated very strongly with the experiences of my community, which is the Blue Mountains and the Hawkesbury. Now, I thought I'd clarify, I don't think they're technically considered regional for your organisation.
That's correct. Our regional definition is determined by the New South Wales State Government, and for this particular network, we don't include the Blue Mountains local. It's all determined by local government areas, as different to the federal government that determines regional through postcodes. We work across both environments, so there's always justification as to who's in and who's out.
And look, before I start, can I just clarify something about your organisation? I understand you've actually been defunded by the New South Wales government. I'm just making sure I'm understanding the current situation properly. Is that right, in the last budget?
Yes, unfortunately, the New South Wales government has had a static arts funding budget for the last 5 years. We've been making representations on behalf of the regional arts development organisations for an increase in their core funding, and the New South Wales state government decided to shuffle the money around. There is no new money, which was extremely disappointing, so that they have distributed across 14 regional arts development organisations money that was previously allocated to Regional Arts New South Wales. However, our organisation has been going for 74 years. We have weathered the storm of different changing policies. I had a board meeting yesterday. We are a responsibly managed organisation, and we have built sufficient reserves, and plus with our other partners, that we can continue operating for at least to the end of 2022. There's an election in 2023. You never know what happens. Policies change, and but also we were looking at a restructure and different revenue model, different membership models. So it's quite exciting, sort of looking at a challenging environment, certainly for the next couple of years. But as we restructure and rethink about the organisation and how we can best continue to deliver our services to our regions, not just through the radio network, but through a broader membership base that is being considered at the moment. But this is all very sudden.
Well, I think the work that you've done on the NBN survey that we've seen in detail certainly shows the importance of being able to bring together all those different voices from regional arts right across the state. So I do hope you're able to continue doing the work that you're doing. So to the survey, you said in your opening statement that social distancing and access to internet were the two biggest things that were holding back and suppressing the ability of the arts community to operate. Can you talk? There's lots of graphs in your report about how all of that worked. Are you able to go into a bit more detail about the findings around the access to the internet in terms of the different types of internet? Because there's quite a lot of breakdowns that you've given about which ones worked best for people and which ones didn't.
Yes, it was really interesting because we were pretty amazed by this unasked question that came up. You know, it was an open-ended question. What are the greatest barriers for you to, restart your businesses and remembering that this was at a time when everyone was in lockdown, was, sort of social distancing was the major one, and followed very quickly on the heels was access to the internet. And we're going, well, what does that mean? So, and when we started delving down into this area, which, is not our core business really, we discovered there were 11 internet options for regional New South Wales. So the only internet option that we don't cover is fibre to the building, because there aren't a great deal of high-rise apartment buildings in the areas in which we live. And the breakdown was, fibre to the node, I had to learn all this stuff, fibre to the curb, fixed wireless. So that was quite interesting. So most of the 27% were subscribed to fibre to the node, 15% to fibre to the curb, 13% to fixed wireless. Then equally, 13% were still on the ADSL, ADS2 network. The 13% were using their mobile phones to access the internet on either 3G or 4G. And I can bear that out with my own experience, because obviously over the last 14 years I've been in this position. I've done an enormous amount of travel across regional New South Wales, and I've just given up trying to access Wi-Fi anywhere. I just toggle my laptop to my phone. It always seems to be more reliable. 8% to satellite. Only 7% of fibre to the premises, and that's, obviously considered the ideal. And then the 1%, I actually had no idea what this meant, but for people who had cable television, that's coaxial cables. Obviously no fibre to the building, and 2% indicated other, so I'm not quite sure what that meant. So it is a great diversity of options depending on where people live. And I think the other thing that came out, and that's why the other thing that we're really surprised about this survey was how much anecdotal evidence, how many people filled in the comment boxes. Most of the times when you send out a SurveyMonkey survey, people just, if they're going to answer it, are just going to, fill in the yes, no questions. But the amazing amount of commentary came through the text boxes of, just real frustration from people trying to work in the world that we have to work in now, and the limitations on the services that they're getting.
I was interested to see that 62% of respondents agreed that there'd been an improvement when they did switch to NBN, but only 6% considered it to be far superior to their previous internet services. And then there was 53% who were less satisfied with NBN, 17% satisfied, and 32% more than satisfied. Did you go any deeper into matching which connections those who said that they had been, which one? The 53% who were less than satisfied. Was there any cross-referencing about the type of connections that they had?
I think that the ones that were able to access fibre to the premises and immediately get much faster and immediate broadband. But we didn't go any further into that. It was, it was just really clear that there was sort of patchwork differences across the sector, and those who are in rural areas, and not necessarily, we're not necessarily talking out in the far west. We're talking about some, areas down the south coast. There is one of our team members who works remotely in a region quite close to Gundagai, who has to buy satellite because of the topography of the landscape. Now, look, I understand that, this is really challenging to get everybody in, say, New South Wales, but in Australia, access to good, fast broadband because of the challenges that we face, with rugged landscapes and, wide open spaces and all things in between, that you can go quite a short distance from a regional town and phone drops out or there is no internet service or whatever. And how that's going to be addressed, I don't know. But I think it has to be addressed because it doesn't just impact on, on artists and arts workers living in regional areas. It impacts on the agricultural sector, it impacts on tourism, it impacts on, local business, small business owners. We have, I think, if one thing that COVID, and I think there've been a lot of lessons learned out of the challenges that we faced during this pandemic, some good things have come out of it as well as some bad things, is how it is now critical for us as a country to ensure that business and private individuals have access to this method of communication. You know, it's the railways of the 21st century.
And one of the things you've just mentioned, satellite there. I noticed in some of the additional comments that people provided was one about someone saying they hadn't applied for satellite NBN, which was the only offering here, and they've said because I need to upload films which would exceed the satellite cap. Was that? I certainly get told that by the creatives in my electorate. Is that something that you're hearing, and how important is it to be able to upload video and that sort of film material for the sector?
Oh, it's critical. Just for example, I just ran the first COVID-free, COVID-safe conference and arts festival in Wagga in November. A massive challenge, and constant changing of planning all the way through. But at the last moment, one of our keynote speakers couldn't make it. We sent a film crew into Sydney to film her keynote and to upload the digital files so that they could be played at the conference. And we wanted it a high-quality film. It was, pretty large. Took 6 hours.
And what did you do in that? Was it uploaded overnight or you just...
Oh, yeah, my poor technical crew. I mean, this was the biggest challenge they've ever faced. They worked through the night. They had one computer continually uploading these things. And, it wasn't that big a file. So anyone that is working creatively in either animation or anything that requires, high-res photography, there is so much creativity and opportunity for artists in the regions, and to live in the regions, of course, is financially viable for people that don't earn massive incomes, and the connectivity with the rest of the world is incredibly important. So, they can work in their home studios doing animation, for example, but if they haven't got enough upload for their files, they then they can't run their business, or they drive into the nearest town. We've got one of the most exciting performing arts, multi-arts companies based in a village outside Narrandera. And I know that they have to, when they're doing grant applications, actually have to drive into Narrandera during the day to upload their grant applications. Everything is done online, right across any dealing with government at any level. And if you don't have access to the internet that's enough to upload your files, you're penalised.
I've got one more question, then I'm going to ask my colleague Brian Mitchell to step in. And I just wanted to touch on the connectivity issues that you raised. I noticed a figure that said only 2.5% of people reported that their service never goes down. So the dropouts and the maintaining connectivity sounds like it is also a really big challenge for you for the people you're representing across the state with NBN.
Look, it's everywhere. During peak lockdown, and I have NBN to the premises. And my organisation, because it is devolved, and I've got team members that work up in the Northern Rivers, and I've got team members that work down in the Riverina area. So, the working on a shared server has been some part of our business practice for about 5 years. I've been working remotely, and you can be working away and just for no particular reason it just disappears. I think everyone's experienced that. And the same thing in a Zoom meeting. How many times you mid-conversation and suddenly everything stops and, we have to pause the meeting, somebody has to dial out and dial back in again. That's probably not the right terminology for a Zoom, but I'm sure
We
everyone
know what you
understands.
mean. Ms Rogers, thank you. And I'll hand over to Brian Mitchell.
Thank you.
Good morning, Ms Rogers. Brian Mitchell, I'm the member for Lyons. My seat is a big agricultural seat in Tasmania. I'm just in your submission here, you talk about that COVID sparked a huge spike in demand. 69% need connectivity for more than half their work, and 32% need it for up to 91 to 100% of their work. Have you done any deep dives at all into what the dollar cost of lack of access is costing your members at all?
No, I'm sorry, we haven't done that.
All right. The other thing, of course, is you mentioned which I think is staggering in terms of your survey respondents, that 38% of them report that the NBN is not available. Now, do you know whether that was all due to topography or what reasons? Or
No, we didn't ask the reasons why. I mean, I think a lot of them don't actually even know why.
yeah.
But it's location, it's the patchwork rollout. It was a really strange rollout, going back to the fact that there were originally identified regional towns that got early rollout of the NBN. But I know one of my colleagues works on Gateway Island in the middle of the Murray River, and that's a whole creative hub there. It is technically in Victoria. And they can get broadband in Wodonga and Albury, but in the creative hub where access to the internet is critical for their work, it's so poor that they do their Zoom conferences and the rest of their work from home.
And please excuse my ignorance of the topography of Albury Wodonga. I drive past there sometimes. But Gateway Island, I take it, we're not talking about an island surrounded by water. It's just like a creative precinct, is it? Or?
No, it actually does. It's actually got, it is actually an island in the Murray that's attached, because it's on the left-hand border, it's actually technically Victoria. So you'd zoom past it on the Hume Highway as you cross over from Victoria into New South Wales. Just before you go over the big bridge.
Just in case the police are listening, I never zoom past. I always do exactly the limit.
You can't zoom past now. There's been a very large police presence there for the last few months.
Look, this issue of people not being able to get connected or having difficulties with their restriction just brings to mind an issue in my electorate in the town of Fingal, which was promised fixed wireless, but has ended up being put on satellite. So we've got a town of more than 100 people on satellite, and basically the reason is because NBN said the business case could not be made. They're at the end of a daisy chain of towers, and NBN said, well, if we put a tower up, the cost per premises is too much, so they've put this town now on satellite. When in fact, if they added the town of Fingal and St Mary's together, which are very similar communities, in the same chain of towers, then the cost per premises would come down to an acceptable level. But I just wonder whether people in the regions are being shortchanged by NBN in terms of their access to NBN services because of the way NBN chooses to model its finances based on its business case. Do you have any comment there at all? Or?
Well, I think the issue is whether it is a business case or whether it's public good. Do we do a business case for building a road to connect villages? Do we build a business case for I think that this for Australia moving forward, competing, economically, internationally, we have to provide as a government. These services need to be provided. It's the new world, and I think that this one of the things that the COVID pandemic and closed down and having people working from home has really clearly demonstrated the urgency of having a world standard connection. Yes,
I go through some of these anecdotal comments that some of your members have said, and as you say, it is quite unusual for people to add those in. And I'm struck by, nobody's talking about complaining about not being able to see Netflix or anything like that. It's all, my business is affected, my income is affected, my ability to trade is affected. It is very much about business, and I just wonder how much opportunity is being lost by regional businesses because of substandard services.
That is a very interesting question and will require a larger survey and more resources than my organisation has.
Well, particularly at the moment, given what the New South Wales government's doing to, unfortunately. Look, I'm about to wrap up, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to add?
I think there's one thing about the NBN satellite that I'd like to add, because as I understand it, it's a pre-purchase agreement. And so you pre-purchase the amount of data that you estimate you're going to need. And one of the things that really impacted on people with satellite connection was children working from home and having to access the broadband for their education, the children before children were allowed to go back to school. And with the amount of data that was required for children's education, this also impacted on artists being able to do their work, because once the data had run out, it had run out.
That was it. Look, I'm going to ask you a question I often ask is, in your view, how fit for purpose is regional broadband?
I think it's very patchwork. I couldn't say, and I think this was fairly evidenced in our survey, that, depending on where you live, if you're living in the right spot, works, and if you're living somewhere else, it's less than ideal.
And what is the single most important thing that you would like to see this committee recommend to the Parliament in terms of how we should go forward?
I'd really like the committee to recommend that there is, certainly far more attention paid to regional Australia and being part of, the new amount of money that's recently been announced by the Minister, that there is certainly an investigation and analysis in a much broader way than I can do into connectivity and access to internet across regional Australia.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. I'm done.
Right on time, Ms Templeman, Mr Mitchell, thank you. Over to you, Dr Hayne.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms Rogers, for your submission and for your presentation this morning. A couple of questions from me, which haven't been covered yet. The 14% of people who plan not to apply to join the NBN, what do we know about them? Why are they planning not to apply? Is it cost? Is it bad reputation? What is it?
I'm just making an assumption here. As I said, for myself, also travelling, a lot of them are finding that they are getting a better connection through their mobile phones. Cost is obviously going to be something, access to it, or whether they have other arrangements. We didn't inquire, but I would say a lot of people are just connecting through their phones, because even though mobile phone service is not ideal, it's certainly a lot better than in some areas than getting NBN. Or it may not even just be offered for where they are.
So there could be some crossover with the 38% where it's not available potentially.
Yeah.
Can I ask you? You noted pretty devastating statistics in regard to natural disasters and loss of connectivity. How quickly was the internet restored in areas of your jurisdiction that were affected by bushfires or floods?
It was patchwork again. Some areas were connected fairly quickly. It depended on the accessibility of the terrain and how much damage had been done to the infrastructure. And it's the same for, it's not just the broadband connectivity. There are still people living in caravans. There are still people whose houses haven't been rebuilt, and it's still pretty awful down there. The bushfires did start in northern New South Wales long before the smoke affected Sydney, and the devastation from people still living outside Tenterfield that still haven't got houses to live in. So it was overshadowed, of course, by the immediate impact of the pandemic, but there are people out there still really working hard. We were given, we manage on behalf of the federal government the Regional Arts Fund. It's a really incredible and fabulous project that is devolved to Regional Arts Australia, who's our peak body, and each of the state manages the fund on behalf of the federal government from the Department of Communications and the Arts. And we were very fortunate to be able to get that $10 million boost out the door from the 1st of July. It was, I think, possibly the first load of money for the arts sector to go out in New South Wales. It was divided into 3 different rafts of funds. And the first one that opened on the 1st of July was a small quick response grant. We're talking about grants to up to $3,000 for people to be able to replace things or upgrade, or it was the first time we've had a grant that's allowed artists to apply for equipment. What was really interesting in that money that went out in less than a month through the application process, some of the applications, for example, some potters down the south coast needed replacement money for their potter's wheel. It got burnt out. Because a lot of these organisations, these small, particularly small individuals, they didn't have adequate insurance. We know that. But so many of the inquiries, both through the performing arts sector and the visual arts sector, so we had musicians and artists all asking for upgraded computers, because they found that the actual gear that they had in the pivot to digital was not sufficient to be able for them to actually do their work effectively. And I thought that was quite an interesting background to this particular survey that we did, was the amount of IT that this fund was requested through this fund. And obviously as well as replacement of equipment and from the bushfires.
Given that we're now in an ongoing COVID situation, and that must have changed everything about the way that you operate arts across all sectors, with social distancing requirements in place and necessities to use QR codes, for example, as people enter a premises. Can you comment on the capacity of arts organisations in regional areas to be able to even do that, for example, with the QR code system? Do they have sufficient bandwidth or connectivity more generally to comply?
Look, the QR code system in New South Wales is pretty straightforward. You just download the app from the Services New South Wales website. You print it off and cover it in some laminate and you stick it at your front door, and it works. It's very simple.
Great.
And most people have a mobile phone, and obviously the backup is, clean pens and a piece of paper just to track people. We went right down the COVID-safe rabbit hole delivering Art State in Wagga at the beginning of November, because it was the 4th of a 4-year project, and with everybody, including my board, saying I couldn't do it. The regulations, as they do, they change all the time. But we were able to produce our own COVID-safe plans and also every venue that we had. Now that is a reasonable-sized regional city. I think there's a greater awareness in the larger populations than they are in the smaller areas of the necessity for QR codes. But we went and supported the small organisations that were participating. That was actually a very straightforward process.
Great. So that's not holding you back. The NBN's not holding you back with any of your restoration now to a COVID-safe environment?
No. Those apps don't take very much width. They're very easy to load down, and most people have them on their phone because it's easier. I mean, there are people that don't have mobile phones.
Sure.
And particularly older people. So there is always the pen and paper alternative to record their access.
Are you able to comment at all on people's digital literacy in the arts, and if there's sufficient support to upskill artists, workers more broadly in the arts sector to now operate much greater in a digital environment?
I think they're pretty skilled. I mean, the arts and creative industries are sort of always the forerunners of how they can tweak and use digital implements, sorry, in a really creative way. So, people haven't been asking, because we obviously, through our network, people ask for professional development. That is certainly not one that has come up as increased digital skills. And in fact, we were able to deliver for our network of communications officer a digital workshop on photography, photographing artworks, which was all delivered online with an online tutor. So it's not the skills; it's the connectivity.
Yeah. So again, I would ask you your message to us around connectivity. With these 11, again, I'm staggered too by the amount of modalities that people are selecting from, subject to, sounds like, availability and cost, and possibly knowledge of what's available. What would you be saying to us? Do you need greater connectivity to the curb, to the node? Do you need broader capacity on the wireless? Do you need all of that?
Look, I think all of the above. I think there really needs to be a far more in-depth investigation, as I say, beyond the resources of my small organisation, to actually look at this issue. Because, as I say, I don't think it's just restricted to arts organisations. It's across the whole regional sector, and I think obviously what we found in New South Wales probably is most likely to have similar outcomes across the country and other. Outside a metropolitan area. And I shouldn't even just make big statements like that, because I know when I was living in Sydney that, my mobile phone service, and I was 10 k's from the CBD, I had to go out on the balcony to speak. There are challenges in the cities as well as in the regional areas. But the regional area is my remit. Love to see a much broader investigation into these issues that we've scratched the surface of, and definitely see some significant investment into improving services for regional communities.
Great. Thanks very much, Ms Rogers. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Dr Haynes. I should acknowledge for Ms Templeman and perhaps Senator Antic, who's on the phone, that joined by Mr Connolly, and that's as well as Senator Davey. And with that, that's a perfect segue for me. Over to you, Mr Connolly.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Ms Rogers, for your time today. I just wanted to query firstly about the survey itself. I've used SurveyMonkey. You mentioned that was the platform before, and I know it can be subject to firewalls, particularly for recipients not being able to access it. If I understand correctly from your submission, there were 112 respondents. What proportion is that of the regional arts community that the survey was sent to?
It was probably about 10 to 15%.
Right.
So,
So
a reasonable size sample, because and, obviously the ones that responded to it, the ones that had issues, we've always got to sort of take that weighting into a survey. But it certainly, and certainly looking at where the respondents came from, there was pretty good coverage right across the state, because when we've broken down that graph, which is on page 9, the pie chart, into the regional areas, our regional arts development organisations, that basically covers all of New South Wales except Newcastle, Sydney, Wollongong, and the Shoalhaven, because they're non-contributing areas, and obviously ACT, which is a separate jurisdiction.
So it sounds like if it was 10 to 15%, there was something like 1,200 odd surveys issued?
Yeah, well, we sent them out, it was a bit of a blind send out. We sent them out to our 3,000 subscribers, to our 3,000 odd. The regional arts development organisations then sent them forward to their subscriber list, because we all have different markets. There are 17 regional conservatoriums in New South Wales, so that would have gone out to all those. The theatre network would have, I don't know what their actual membership number is, say 100, 150. And Ausdance also has a very extensive membership network across regional New South Wales. So that's how we managed to distribute it through our regular EDMs. We sent it as a stop press saying, please respond to this survey. We offered them an incentive of a bottle of wine, which wasn't a huge incentive, but, funds are limited. And yes, that's why we were surprised. Compared to the COVID survey, we got far more responses to the NBN survey, and also some comments going, thank you for asking us, who were actually outside our network. So that was quite interesting.
So just touching on you mentioned you've got 3,000 subscribers. I'm just trying to get a feel for, so in the regional arts development organisations,
They then have their own subscribers.
What's the total number of people
I
that
have
you
that
connect
figure,
with?
but absolutely not in my head, I'm afraid.
Right.
And then we supported, as well as sending it out through to the actual subscribers, we then supported that through social media platforms. So I can get you those figures.
That'd be great. Yeah, just so I understand, of the 112
How many we
survey
actually sent
respondents,
out.
what
Yep.
sort of proportion is that of the regional arts development organisation community? Thank you for that. And the second question I have is, my understanding is that NBN is currently available to 99% of premises right across Australia. So I noted, and look, there are exceptions. For example, where a council or a landowner refuses to have a wireless tower or fixed wireless tower on their premise, that can limit availability for those properties that are affected. But I saw in your survey that 38% of people have said that they have, so that NBN is unavailable to them. So I wonder if it's possible that some of those survey recipients are of the opinion that Sky Muster does not count as NBN access. I'm wondering why there's such a difference between 99% availability and 38% of respondents saying NBN is not available. Do you think, as I said, that it's possible they're counting Sky Muster as not providing NBN access?
I have to confess, Mr. Connolly, I have no idea what Sky Master is.
Okay.
So that is getting down to some detail.
Provided enlightenment.
For the benefit of you, Ms.
It's the NBN
Rogers,
satellite.
It's satellite, yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to test whether that might have been the opinion that satellite-based access, they may deem that as not being accessible. But it's, if I'm correct, it sounds like I should frame that as a question. Of those 112 respondents to the survey, have you also followed up with the survey respondents to clarify questions at all to this point?
No, it was just a very general survey, just to sort of unpack what the issues were that came out of the first one. That was within the capacity of our organisation and within the capacity of our workload.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Rogers.
I was going to ask almost the identical question because, hi Ms. Rogers, how are you? I live outside Conago, so on a rural property. I've got Sky Muster satellite NBN services, so I was also very interested to read that 38% of people were saying there was no NBN available to them. Given that it's fairly straightforward to apply for Sky Muster if you are outside the towns and there is no other option for you. So I found that a very interesting statistic. It
would probably be very interesting if we had the time to drill down where those responses came from. Yeah. Because I think there are some of probably less than in the western parts of New South Wales where there are big skies and flat land. In the hinterland from the coast and in the mountains where getting direct signal is actually fairly tricky because of the topography. That could be an area that could be worth further investigation.
Yes, I agree, but it's, as you say, not necessarily for a resource-constrained organisation like yours. Maybe it's something that the NBN needs to have a look at itself. You were also talking in response to Dr. Haynes' questions about the fact that with those emergency grants that were offered, a lot of artists took them up to upgrade equipment. Do you think that it is possible that some of the issues that people are reporting about, capacity to upload speeds and delays or lags may also be because they're using older equipment?
Look, I can't give a definitive answer on that, but most of the requests for equipment were to be able to, particularly in the music sector, lots of musicians requested, and lots of visual artists, was the ability to manipulate the files that they use to create their work. It was all very focused on how we create our work, and their hard drives didn't have enough memory or capacity to be able to upload new programs that are industry standard.
Right. Is it possible for us to get a list of the questions from your survey?
Yes.
Because you've done your submission's very good, and it contains a lot of the good anecdotes and a lot of the quotes. But just it would help us understand if we could just see the questions that were posed.
Yes, so we essentially in the survey results, the questions were around each of those. Those graphs and things that we're able to produce. So, where are you located? And we gave them some options. But I'm certainly send you a copy of the survey, the vanilla copy of the survey.
Yes, absolutely. That just the questions. We don't need the individual, but that would just help us greatly. So, I was also. I think, and congratulations on Art State Wagga. I did go. I was there for a day, and I was there also in the morning in Wagga with Minister Fletcher, who attended and gave a speech, and they announced on the same day he announced that Wagga was going to be one of the regional NBN business fibre zones. That would have been after your survey, but have you had any opportunity or any conversations with people about whether that will assist their businesses if they're in a region where they can access a business fibre zone?
Senator Davey, I'm sorry. My entire head was waiting for the New South Wales Arts Minister's announcement, trying to be polite and trying to put an event on with a crisis that was announced on the Monday before we opened. I was very excited that Minister Fletcher took some time out of after announcing this to actually have a look at some of the federal government funded programs that were part of Art State, and he actually was able to come to the opening and announce the amazing renewal money that's gone into regional New South Wales, that second fund as part of the Regional Arts Fund boost. But any more than that, I was totally unaware of. I was living in a bubble.
I can understand it was a very, very good program for Art State, and I congratulate Regional Arts New South Wales for putting it on, and for the work you do to raise awareness and to advocate for artists in the regions.
At my own cost, apparently.
Yes. That is it from me. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. I've just got one question, Ms Rogers, and it's really a point of clarification. You said in your evidence earlier that one of the issues with satellite service, which you now know can be and is often referred to as Sky Muster, is that it's a pre-purchase arrangement. If I was to tell you it's not, and that it's effectively just like every other service in terms of the purchase of a plan, would you would you accept that, or and if not, can you explain to me what you mean by pre-purchase?
All right. Now, look, just please remember this is not my field of expertise. I am just going on.
And I've got to tell, don't feel stressed about it. I just want to make sure we get it right. Tell you, Ms. Rogers, I'm no technophile either, so.
So this was anecdotal evidence of a colleague within the network who works on satellite out in the hills behind Gundagai, between Gundagai and Tumut. And her information, said to me that, where they were having great challenge, and she runs a communications company, so communications absolutely needs to have access to good broadband.
Yep.
That she was really challenged during the lockdown because of the amount of data and bandwidth her children were needing to use. And it was either going to cost more to upgrade, look, I'm not sure of the actual details, but this is what I assume, or they were going to run out. So the actual pricing, we didn't ask anything other than, how do you feel if it's affordable or not?
Yeah, Ms. Rogers, I think that lines up a lot more with other experiences, and that hangs together. I just wanted to be careful around the phrase pre-purchase and these things. It's like I think we might have been confusing that scenario with prepaid mobile phone arrangement. So that's all. Like,
Chair?
yeah, sure, Mr. Mitchell. Just before I let Ms. Rogers go.
It may assist Ms. Rogers. Ms. Rogers, of course, with satellite has traditionally been a very finite data service because, once the bird's in the air, you can't add more capacity to it. So, of course, satellite customers have traditionally been put on a very finite plan where they've only got a limited amount of data available to them. So I am happy to report, Chair, that during the pandemic, NBN Co did make more data available on the satellite with the unused data. So there's a bit of a good news story there. But that may be what your contact is referring to, Ms. Rogers, that once the satellite's in the air and Sky Muster customers are given a data plan, unlike people on fixed wireless or other things where if we go over we can just have more data, traditionally Sky Muster people have been told, well, that's it. But that was relaxed during the pandemic.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Chair, if there is a moment, can I just clarify?
There's literally one moment. So, yep.
I thought we had till 10:15.
Well, we do technically, but we did ask witnesses to come a little early as it was progressing.
Okay. So yes, I just wanted to reinforce, I think, what Mr. Mitchell said. I suspect it's around caps, the caps on satellite uploads, because I know filmmakers and commercial makers and anyone with visual artists wanting to upload large amounts are really struggling with satellite because of the caps. So, but Ms. Rogers, I just wanted to check something. You talked about running a workshop, an online workshop, a photography workshop as part of the support you're providing. And that made me think about the feedback I've had from visual artists that, in fact, some of them, I was looking at how businesses had performed during COVID and their, in terms of their use of internet to generate their business and the like. And visual artists have certainly, some of them have said that they have had improvements in their business, unlike theatre and filmmakers and dance. You also mentioned the regional arts quick response program. Can I just clarify, that was the COVID quick response program rather than the bushfire? Was there a similar bushfire arts recovery program?
This was a federal government program delivered through the pipeline, the mechanism, get the terminology right, the mechanism of the Regional Arts Fund. That was initially conversations were held with the federal government as a result of the bushfires, but then it became escalated when the impacts of COVID were known. So in New South Wales it was rolled, and across the country it was rolled out in 3 different programs. And what was actually really exciting is that, the regular annual RAF program, Regional Arts Fund program, was able to be run out normally as well. So the first lot was called RAF Relief, and in New South Wales, because each state is able to adjust the needs and the upper amounts and the amounts within the quantum figure. We rolled out the relief funds as soon as they became available. So that was small grants on an ongoing basis until the funds had been expended, of up to $3,000, with the criteria around it. So impact of COVID or bushfires. So that was the first lot. The second fund was really significant strategic fund called RAF Renewal, and the Minister announced successful applications at ArtState. For longer strategic arts programs with multiple partners to build sustainable projects in regional areas. And the third one is RAF Recovery, which is actually being assessed in New South Wales next week. So they also, and because, again, we're a small organisation, we actually had to plug the timing for these in with the timing of managing the regular Regional Arts Fund that we would have as an ongoing program. It was a fantastic, so welcomed, so oversubscribed, I can't tell you. Definitely demonstrated increased need.
So needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes. And I know my community is very disappointed to not qualify.
Well, it
for
depends on their
funding.
postcode. It's federal funds.
Yes, I know. It does depend on it. All right. Look, thank you. So that explains where the computer and the technology stuff came out.
Yeah,
of.
that's where that
Great.
came in, as well as things like
Thank
potter's
you.
wheels and,
Yeah.
burnt things.
All right. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Chair, and big thank you to you, Ms Rogers, for your submission, for the generosity of your time in giving evidence today, including travel to Canberra. It's very much appreciated, and with that I can offer you your leave. That being said, you have been asked to provide certain documents. I think the nature of the survey, I think it was referred to as the vanilla version of the survey. I'm just going to need your assistance, Madam Secretary. That material, if that was available by when, would that be convenient?
Chair, 4 weeks from the receipt of Hansard.
Okay, so if you could bear that in mind, as I said earlier, you'll get a copy of the transcript for any transcription errors, and when you get that, if you could provide that other material to us, Ms. Ross, within that time frame, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you for your time again.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Excellent. I now welcome representatives from the Strathboat, gentlemen, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, Shire Council. Thank you for taking the time to give evidence to the committee and submission. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses and evidence has been provided to you. I also can confirm for you that a copy of your Shire, the plan of your Shire has been disseminated to the committee members. That's available on your email for this evidence. Now, gentlemen, for the Hansard record, could you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today?
Chris Rayburn, Mayor of Strathbogie Shire.
Steve Cooper, Economic Development Coordinator of Strathbogie Shire.
Mr. Cooper, we might need to resolve the audio. You're particularly faint, unless others have a better reception than me. Perhaps try again.
That'd be better.
Yeah, that's better. You're going to have to stay close to the microphone. My apologies.
So Steve Cooper, Economic Development Coordinator of Strathbogie Shire.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Gentlemen, with that, I now invite you to make a short opening statement, and at the conclusion of your remarks, will invite you to ask questions. Can I just pause? On my screen, I've just had a David Russell appear.
Yes, that's me. I'm also the attorney, Chair. I don't think my video camera is working. So you may-
No, that's okay. Mr. Russell, I wonder if you could please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear.
Can't hear me.
Can you hear me, Mr. Russell?
Yes, I can hear you now. My name is David Russell. I'm Economic Recovery Officer, Shire of Strathbogie.
Okay, yeah, you're right. We've got your audio. We don't have your visual. If you feel free to resolve that. Otherwise, we do have committee members available just on audio. So that will be okay. Gentlemen, I invite you to make a short opening statement at the conclusion of your remarks. I'll invite members of the committee to ask questions for the witnesses, and a reminder for colleagues, please ensure you're on mute when you're not speaking, and apologies because I didn't observe that rule just before.
Thank you, Tony, for the invitation to join your committee meeting today. Strathbogie Shire is 100,000 people spread across 303,000 square kilometres of beautiful Victorian countryside. We are located 120 kilometres northeast of Melbourne between the Goulburn River and the Strathbogie Ranges, with the Hume Freeway and the interstate rail line dissecting down the middle. Our towns are Avenel, Euroa, Longwood, Nagambie, Strathbogie and Violenttown. Our submission was made from a practical regional perspective. It highlights that despite all the plans and grand national sweeping statements about rollouts, super fast speeds, business fibre zones and national building, the NBN job is not yet done. For many in the Strathbogie, the promised super fast speeds has not arrived. Connectivity is disappointing. The patchwork of fibre, copper, wireless, satellite and mobile service technology has not delivered in Strathbogie Shire. To discover what our business owners really think about NBN, we surveyed them. Their comments were instructive. They recorded disappointment and frustration with the NBN, slow speeds, dropout, congestion, no mobile signal, core satisfaction is more frustrating when promises of performance are not delivered. It is not a surprise to us that they are frustrated at being receiving end of services that do not nearly meet their expectations. With unfathomable depths of technology complexity, details of which is incomprehensible, and disputes that are very difficult to resolve between customer, retail and the NBN code acting as a wholesaler. Business should not be required to register complaints about service, call out technicians, wait, call an RSP helpline, wait more, or write to their local MP to get connected and receive a good service from a $51 billion national building project. Evidence gathered in the Goulburn Region Partnership Digital Plan and the Australian Digital Inclusion Index is clear. Regional Australia are not enjoying the full services of the National Broadband Network. The latest digital index results place Northern Victoria 8.4 index points adrift of Melbourne. The NBN is a foundation infrastructure. We must get it right. Good internet connections proved to be a business infrastructure essential during COVID-19 lockdowns. It must be treated accordingly by the government. And slightly off the topic, don't sell the NBN code to an uncertain future. Rather, continue to develop the NBN in the public interest. Recent NBN code announcements about business fibre zones do not stretch new fibre to our Strathbogie region. It appears that there will be a continuing struggle for internet speed and reliability in Strathbogie, and if nothing is done about it, we will be left behind in the digital race and miss out on economic development opportunities. That is not an option we can accept. Small business will be left in the wake of competitors with better connections in other places. Our appeal to the committee is that we are a relevant stakeholder, including NBN, consult and collaborate with us in our region. We should all accept that the NBN job is not yet done and we do need to do something about it. Expectations have not been met. Service is in some locations is better on the mobile network, but 3G, 4G is intermittent or missing in many places. Businesses and farms out of town are not served well by fixed wireless and the restraints of the satellite services. The necessary follow-up work to meet the policy objectives of a universal available NBN is urgent. Where equitable NBN closes the digital with the offer of ubiquitous, then as Minister Fletcher has said, Australia can capture the productivity, efficiency and lifestyle benefits that widely available broadband can support. Not yet in Strathbogie, but we are looking forward to it. Thank you for the opportunity to submit and be present here today. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that opening statement, Mayor Rayburn. The committee is made up of members across the political spectrum. We have representatives of the Australian Labor Party, led by Madam Deputy Chair. We have independent and minor parties. And of course, we have coalition members. What we do is apportion time equally, and the best way we find to do that is to effectively assign the first, second and third tranche of available time to the respective, if you like, entities within the parliament. So what I'm going to do, and my job and I often feel bad doing this, but my job is often to pull people up at the end of that time. But I think we'll be fine. We've got a reasonable amount of time. Dr. Haynes, I'm proposing to begin with you, if you like, and we don't have a heap of time, but I think unless I'm have made an error, it's about 20 minutes each. So over to you, Dr. Haynes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and a very warm welcome to Mayor Rayburn and congratulations on your appointment. Mr Cooper and Mr Russell and committee, I'm delighted to represent Strathbogie as the member for Indi, and indeed it's the issues that Strathbogie Council are outlining for us today that prompted me to become a member of this committee so that I can work with them and let's hope we can get some resolution. So I'm really grateful for your submission today, which lays out so clearly the challenges that you're experiencing there. And I want the committee to note that in the opening submission from Strathbogie Shire, you will see that this area is only 123 kilometres from Melbourne, so we're not talking about a place that's extremely remote. Could I ask you, gentlemen, please, just to paint for me a bit of a picture? I notice, and I'm really grateful for the map that you've sent through also to the committee. There's excellent data that you've supplied, not only survey data, but the work from the Goulburn Digital Plan, and indeed this map that highlights the types of technology that are available to the Strathbogie Shire. I note that 34% of the NBN to the area is fixed wireless. Can you tell me a little bit about the experience of people on fixed wireless and why you think there may be some issues with speeds, dropouts with that particular technology?
Dr. Russell will answer. Thank you, Dr. Haynes. Yeah, the fixed wireless doesn't have the reliability that you might expect of a technology. It only has a range of about 7 kilometres. A lot of the area around in Strathbogie is covered by fixed wireless. It tends to get congested. There's a tendency in some places for it to be available on one site in one location, but very nearby to drop out and not be available on another. A good example of that is around Nagambie. If you have a look a little on the map, south of Nagambie towards Mitchelton Road, they have a lot of problems in that area because there's trees, there's dips, there's the river, there's some hills, and the fixed wireless offer just doesn't work as it should. So in our survey, we had people saying that they didn't get the service they expected, and that was disappointing to them.
Have we lost Mr. Russell?
No, I'm still here.
Are you still there? So are you? It was a little difficult to hear you, David. So, which is maybe illustrating the problem you're trying to describe for us. Is it the topography that you're talking about? Is that what you're suggesting is the issue with wireless? I can see lots of heads nodding.
Yeah, it is topography, but it is also that it actually doesn't have the strength to get out to some places. You know, it has a range. It doesn't cover the whole of the Shire. It has a range from a tower for a certain distance. So in that distance, you can have actually it's a countryside. There's hills and trees and geographical features. But in that distance, you can get intermittency or a reduced efficiency of the signal.
Okay, so it's also range, I'm hearing. So a solution to that is a solution more towers or a solution a different technology?
If I may, Doctor.
Mr. Cooper, I think your microphone may be on mute.
Yeah.
Now we can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah, I apologise. Getting used to this technology. If I may just add to David's comment, yes, it's certainly a technology issue and a topography issue. As I'm sure you're aware of the terrain we have in the Strathbogie ranges and the digital line of sight technology. So, whilst we're not entirely certain of the exact fix, I would think, and it's speculation, that probably a different mix of technology with perhaps more fibre, more landline available for some areas, as certainly the lack of capacity and connectivity with the wireless is a considerable problem here.
Mr. Cooper, can I just confirm that there is no fibre connection to businesses to the major towns of Euroa and Violet Town, Nagambie?
Sorry, David Russell, I'll answer. There is no fibre in Violet Town. It is all fixed wireless. There is fibre in Euroa. If you look at the maps, the yellow dots, which are all mass in Euroa, are fibre to the node. Small amount of fibre to the curb in Euroa, very small.
Yep.
Like 1% of the total. And there's fibre in Nagambie as well. But in the inconvenient places, Mangalore, Avenel, Longwood, Ruffy, Violet Town, Strathbogie, there's no fibre.
And could you just explain for us, please, in the areas where there is fibre, are you having the same problems as what you're experiencing in the other parts of the Shire?
Well, prime example, Dr. Haynes, is we're sitting talking to you now and we're in Euroa and you're having difficulty listening to us. So the system is not using, we're not getting maximised response to that. So this is a classic. We're sitting in that Euroa right in the middle of the yellow zone and we still are not getting good connectivity.
Okay. Yep, thank you. I think it's a pretty good example today. In your submission on page 12, you've said that a focused and concerted effort be made to ensure that the NBN delivery in this region is brought up to standard, and you recommend a collaboration of local, state and Commonwealth governments using the Goulburn Regional Digital Plan as a guide. How could you see this working in practice for you?
One of our biggest concerns is that we're seeing extra technology being put into regional, which is a great thing, but we're not seeing it put into our rural shires. We feel that if we don't bring a a similar level of technology, connectivity and capacity into these smaller shires, we will just drop further and further behind with regard to competitiveness in attracting residents and business. I'm sure everybody's got their stories regarding the experiences of COVID or connectivity that people experience in rural and regional areas. We were no different. In fact, we think we're probably at the significantly lower end of the scale as far as connectivity and capacity.
Mr. Cooper, I think we really do need you a bit closer to the microphone.
Can you? How is that? Is that any better?
Marginally.
Is that any better?
Yeah, it's better. Perhaps if you continue. Whoever's there assisting Mr. Cooper, I notice his computer is on mute, so I'm wondering if it's being picked up somewhere else.
No, I've tried to unmute. It's still unmute. So is that any better? I'm on another computer.
Yeah, that's much better.
Okay. All right, yeah, sorry. I suppose going back to our principal concerns here are that we're seeing greater technology put into the regions and business connectivity, and we're concerned that we are being left behind and will become less attractive to businesses and residents when they're looking at places to move to or invest. So we feel that yes, the extra technology that's being supplied, these hubs that are being supplied to the regional cities, it would be great to extend that technology to the rural areas as well. And that's probably our greatest concern is the digital divide is going to continue to grow by actually improving the technology in other areas and leaving us behind.
Mr. Cooper, could you explain to the committee some of the activities that happen in the Strathbogie Shire, for example, bush markets, agricultural field days, those kinds of activities, and how the connectivity performs in those situations and impacts that they have when large numbers of people gather in the district?
I think our Mayor, Chris Rayburn, has got a classic example of what happens when we have possibly one of the most well-known markets in Victoria is the Violet Town market, and he can speak from personal experience on the problems encountered there, particularly as they've tried to emerge from COVID. So I might pass to him if that's okay, Dr. Haynes.
That'd be fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Haynes. Yeah, because I represent the Honeysuckle Creek ward, Violet Town is my home where I live, and also I'm a member of the Violet Town Action Group, which runs the Violet Town market. We, during COVID, closed down. On the 14th of November, we reopened under the COVID plan, which we have to do under the state health regime, where we had to do QRing for everybody that came in and out. We had around 3,500 people come to that market on the 14th of November, and the biggest problem was we couldn't QR people in or out because the system just could not handle the amount of people that had to QR. It was taking up to 5 to 10 minutes for people to QR and queue out, and under the rules of operating that the COVID plan, we must be able to QR people in. So if we had a breakout of COVID, we could advise people of this. The system didn't allow us to do that. And it was one of the biggest, to be honest, a very scary thing for us as a community, because we've got a 64-bed nursing home there. And we just felt that the whole system within the technology of internet and mobile services just failed us. Something shocking.
Thanks, Mr. Rayburn. Could you also explain to us, please, how the district manages, for the sake of the other members of the committee, this area has substantial dry bushland and hilly area with bushfire preparedness. Your telecommunications using the internet bearing in mind we're an NBN committee, and also, of course, conscious that you've noted in your submission that 13% of people use the internet via mobile phone technology, but how these issues of connectivity are affecting you in terms of your emergency services.
If I may, Dr. Haynes, Kestrel Aviation. Sorry, did you catch that first part? Kestrel Aviation operates the state's aerial bushfire fighting capacity or capability, and based next to Mangalore Airport as their central headquarters, Mangalore being at the southern end of our local government area. They have, I understand, wireless connectivity that is very poor, to the point that they have gone back to using mobile telephone to access their data and their headquarters. And that obviously has extreme risk, as we have a really bushfire prone area, very dry grass, as you say, forest areas, not, you know, at one side of the local government area. So basically that aerial firefighting capacity is very much reliant on a mobile telephone tower, because they can't get access to any form of land-based and therefore secure internet. And of course, towers and power goes out during bushfires and floods, etc. And that could leave them in a difficult situation of trying to meet the firefighting requirements of the region. So yeah, we're very concerned about that particular business, and given that what its mission is. Seems strange that they have to rely on a mobile telephone tower to keep their data or access to their data. There are other areas that we've experienced bushfires in Crichton Creek to the southern end a few years ago. We have, this is slightly off track, we have lobbied and received a mobile telephone upgrade there, but we're still concerned about the capacity, given the very limited access for people to get in and out in a bushfire. Pretty much one road in, one road out, and they are highly reliant on mobile telephones and internet for information nowadays, such as the CFA website. So again, that type of situation is reflected across the LGA. That's a classic example.
Thank you. In the few minutes that I've got left with you, I'd like to hear from you your recommendations to this committee. What would you be asking us to recommend to the government to remedy these issues that you've illustrated so clearly to us?
David Russell, yeah. We were recommending that there be a collaboration of everybody involved, local government, state government, Commonwealth, and the NBN code, and for that matter, suppliers of mobile phone services, because those mobile phone services are connected into internet these days. It's all one package. Therefore, we need a collaborative approach, not leaving out the local governments, including the local governments, and we need the NBN code to come and tell us about their plans. But so far, they haven't really done that.
And the other issue I would add there, if I can, is some equity, not necessarily based on the economic return for service providers, but more what is needed in the region would be what we believe the way to approach it, because if we rely simply on economics, then we'll constantly see more money going to regions in the city than what we're ever going to see here in the rural areas, and that will end up with a substandard service.
Thank you, and I have got a couple of more minutes, I think. Ms. Templeman's just let me know. I wonder if you could.
Can I just add, Chair? We're very happy for Dr. Haynes to use our time, given her very deep understanding of this region.
Dr. Haynes, I was also going to say to you, we've got a few questions, but there'll be plenty of time.
Okay,
so
great.
Feel free.
I'd just like the gentleman to share with us the regional digital index and the significant disparity there for this region with other like regions, the rest of the state, and what suggestions you have to overcome this divide. Notwithstanding, I did hear you just say then you feel like you're not getting much communication from NBN around availability of plans and technology and assistance. Wondering if you could speak more broadly to the Digital Inclusion Index.
Yeah, David Russell, the digital index is an important indicator of the divide between city and country. We have been behind here and we continue to be behind, about 8 index points behind Melbourne and further behind central Melbourne. And when people who are living in regions and country Victoria see that and know that, that disappoints them and they feel that they're not getting the best possible result. Now, digital index includes all sorts of things, socio-economic and educational levels and ability to actually connect. So it includes technology, but it also includes the different methods, includes mobile phone connections. So if you're a person who can't really afford to have connection via a link to your home, you might just have a mobile phone you use for internet. You're a long way behind others who've got good connections in other places where they can afford a computer, afford a connection and afford a good speed. That divide has not necessarily been bridged at this time. And we see that we're actually falling behind here. As technology and speeds increase in other places and they don't increase here, we're actually falling behind by standing still. So it'd be interesting to see what happens with the index in the future. I recommend the Australian Digital Index, Australian Digital Inclusion Index to the committee, and it was included in our submission because it's a very well produced annual index of the performance of just really the whole system of provision of internet services.
So in your submission, you've suggested that there are 5 aspects to this to remedy this situation, and that's improvement to the enabling infrastructure, digital uptake, and that's in relation to affordability, so capability, people's understanding of how to use digital technologies, visitor location supply and primary production supply. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to the visitor location supply, because again, I'm very conscious that with the COVID recovery plans, regional tourism is a major input for improving the economies of local areas, regional areas such as yours. Could you speak a little bit to visitor locations and how you would see that?
We certainly at the moment have significant problems in the Ngambia and Mitchelton region is probably our biggest tourist area. You would be aware that Mitchelton Winery has a large luxury hotel that's built recently, a few years ago. It has very limited connectivity and capacity to the point where we feel it affects the ability to attract people to the site, and the owners and the other nearby wineries also feel that is a problem. And Ngambia also has limited capacity. We have the largest freshwater fishing competition in Australia there once a year. Very successful last year. It didn't happen this year because of the pandemic. But basically the system became overloaded there. People couldn't connect to either mobile phone or internet. The system, I should add, of the competition is based on an app where the fish is photographed on a map and sent in, so it's real-time stuff. But because of the lack of capacity, a lot of problems. So again, very clunky, very difficult for people to participate in the competition. Up in the Strathbogie Ranges, very, very popular tourist destination, particularly for bushwalking, etc. And here at Euroa, also limited capacity. We are developing a major project in bushwalking, and a lot of that is online maps that people can access. There are so many places where it's just not really a functional option at this stage. And other places we are aware of have better access, and of course have the opportunity to compete or to attract people for those reasons. So I'm probably offering up more problems than solutions, but I think you've probably heard a lot of things through this committee. The issue for visitors is a difficult one. They can't access the things they need, particularly if they're together in large numbers. Be it the Violet Tower market, which I said is a hugely popular and well-known market across regional Victoria, or in our Ngambia tourist region. Same thing, very difficult if there's a crowd or there's a lot of people. And as we emerge from COVID, we are really desperate to attract those visitors back. And it's a little bit hard to do it. Well, this is one more hurdle in doing it, I should say.
So again, would you see in those regions more towers would solve that solution, or again, I'm thinking of the hotels, potentially more fibre available in those places, but in the more remote areas where you go bushwalking, closer access to towers?
I think the fibre option to the larger population areas, and the problem with towers, as we know, is they have limited range and they also have some limited capacity in because of line of sight problems. So in the case of the hotel fibre, on the flatlands, probably wireless would be more effective with more towers, and that could also play into the mobile phone access as well. But also Violet Town, I think, probably, and Euroa probably just need more fibre or fibre access for Violet Town at all.
Thank you. My final question is around primary production. If you could speak to what's happening in that space, please, understanding that this is a very rich agricultural area as well.
Yeah. Approximately 31% of our economy is based on agriculture, primarily in the areas of grazing and cropping, agriculture, and that. We also have a significant equine industry and a significant wine industry. A problem I can relate from our survey is that a large horse breeder, a thoroughbred breeder, heavily committed to the racing industry, often takes part in online auctions and sells thoroughbreds on online auctions, and they have regular problems in participating in those auctions because of the lack of capacity of the NBN to allow them. And some of these auctions go worldwide and they just can't participate properly because of the problems with the NBN. Many of our farmers are now moving into higher levels of technology in how they would plan and plant and harvest their crops. They use data that's downloadable. They do use some GPS as well, but it's a mix of technologies, and they are experiencing those connectivity and capacity problems as well. So agriculture is a hugely important part of our economy. I believe that during the COVID pandemic, a lot of wine has been sold online through our local wineries, and they have also had some issues. So again, the connectivity capacity for agriculture is not great.
Thanks very much, Mr. Cooper. That's all from me. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent, Dr. Haynes. Gentlemen, I might just take up a couple of things, if I could. I think I've got a very good mind's eye picture of your Shire, courtesy of your evidence. And it's been assisted, obviously, by Dr. Haynes, who's familiar with owing to it being in her electorate. But I'm interested in particular with the suggestion around effectively a cooperative partnership going forward to seek to bridge the digital divide, for want of a better phrase. I'm just wondering, has your Shire, and look, if I fall back into, referring to you as a council, my apologies, but old habits in South Australia die pretty hard. Has your Shire given some consideration to a couple of programs that were recently announced. Firstly, there's the co-investment strategy that NBN has announced. So that's a $50 million fund to identify opportunities to extend business-grade services outside designated NBN business fibre zones. So we've made an announcement, well, NBN Co has made an announcement that there'll be certain business fibre zones in regional Australia, but alongside that, there was a $50 million fund calling for local councils and shires, effectively local government, and others to consider a petition to join that NBN business fibre zone network. So that's my first question. Have you considered any for any of your communities in Strathbogie?
Yeah, well, we have had discussions with NBN Co, and we get a little bit of detail about that program you're talking about, the connection program, but we haven't got detail to the point where we can make an application or put in our bid, if you like. And it concerns us that the communication with NBN Co is intermittent. You know, we need to have a regular communication, not just with the NBN Co, but with the Victorian government and the Commonwealth, so that these types of new plans that are coming up, business fibre zones, etc., come to us in a timely manner, not just announced in a press release and suddenly we find that either we're in or we're out.
Yeah, no, I think we're at cross purposes, Mr. Russell, with respect. The NBN fibre zone decision is one where an announcement of various communities was made, but alongside that was this fund, which indicates that there's the opportunity to involve communities. So I think what I'm hearing from you is that you're enlivened to this opportunity, and I hope that the Strathbogie Council will consider pursuing it at an appropriate time once guidelines are disseminated and these things. The other really big opportunity I see, and I mean I'm sure knowing how committed Dr. Haynes is to her electorate, and also this issue in particular, as evidenced by her presence on our committee. There's also a $300 million fund that NBN Co has established, which is being referred to as the co-investment fund. Are you familiar with this announcement and in particular what it's seeking to achieve?
Yes, we've heard about it, but we don't have any great detail. And again, had a discussion with NBN Co, but haven't had any information coming back to us.
Yeah, well, these are relatively fresh announcements. Obviously, NBN Co has been focused up to this point in terms of its rollout and achieving its operational targets. We're now moving past that to improve access and serviceability in terms of regional communities. So I'm pleased to hear you're aware of it. It's as I understand it, an opportunity for, in particular, local and state governments to co-invest with NBN Co to solve and improve services in respective communities. It's not a cookie cutter approach. My understanding in discussions with the Minister is it's about bespoke solutions working hand in glove, local, state and federal governments. So I'm sure you're doing what my councils are doing right now, which we're in deep discussions to see how we can solve any issues there might be or meet any kind of particular interest or demand. So I encourage you to reach out to that. I think I have in the room Senator Davey.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to bring you back to the comments you were making about the QR code system, particularly recently. It was also raised this morning with Regional Arts New South Wales. They also spoke about it. I take it there's quite different experiences between the New South Wales system and the Victorian system, because Ms Rogers was saying that their system works very well. But does your QR system rely on internet or is it smartphone because I know the New South Wales system is entirely on smartphones, so more dependent on mobile coverage than internet.
I believe it is mobile phone reliant, but given that mobile phone and internet are pretty much hand in hand with these systems in many ways, we believe the capacity or connectivity is still an issue, whether it's mobile phone or NBN. I'm uncertain of what technology the state government in Victoria has chosen to use, but clearly trying to connect to it or enter data into it with any sort of large numbers just is not an acceptable performance. We can't. There's no upload capacity.
Just if I may continue on there, if I can, please, sir.
Yeah.
Is the fact that in Violetown, which I was talking about before, when we, at the market, we had the QRing, we saturated the system, but also down in our main street where the local traders were, they had their issues with FOS machines and that operating, which operates on the internet. So there was two forms of saturation. And if we're looking at in Australia going forward in the near future to cashless society, we have to have the ability to be able to use our mobile networks or our internet networks to be able to, for people to be able to pay for things and have that access. So this is going to become a more and more needed product in the future, just because of COVID, just because of how our society is now going to use internet and the mobile services greater and greater in our lives.
Yes, thank you. And I do note that your submission, you talk about black spots around the mobile coverage, which is the telco company's issues, not NBN's issues, but related to that, because you do note that you have 18% of people who responded to your survey are on satellite services. Do you, would that also be the areas where there is poor mobile connection, so that they're looking at satellite as a solution instead?
Well, the satellite solution is driven by the allocation from NBN Co in the first place. But yes, you're right. Classically, where a property is allocated as satellite service, usually there's some difficulty with mobile cover. Once you get up into the hills, mobile cover changes very quickly. You could be, go around a corner and it disappears, or you can go up the road a bit and it disappears. And for people who are living in those circumstances, no mobile cover, limited satellite NBN, power failure that occurs from time to time or in an emergency situation will likely occur, and get cut off from communication very rapidly. So it is a problem. And these two things are not, mobile cover and internet service are not in the minds of the residents or the business owners, are not two completely separate matters. They are joint. They get their they get their internet either through their phone or through a satellite or a fixed line or whatever. They don't see them as being different. They're getting service using both systems. Sometimes they have to change from one system to the other because one is not working and no longer available to them. So you can't divorce the two, and in lots of parts, if you look at the maps that we've provided, in lots of parts of Shire, you get away from the Hume Highway and it's almost all satellite cover. In fact, it's satellite cover to the value of, I think it's 27% of the Shire, and fixed wireless for a 39%, so 66% in total. 2/3 of the Shire is not at all related to fibre. The only places where fibre exists are Nagambie and Euroa. Lower Town's problems associated with the QR code in the market and the internet on market day. No fibre in Lower Town.
So no fibre in Violet Town at all?
No. There's no fibre in Lower Town, Longwood, Avenel, Strathbogie. It's only the towns of Ngambia and Euroa that have fibre. You can be not very far out of those towns and no fibre.
Right. So the other towns, they rely on fixed wireless, is that?
Mostly fixed wireless, but also satellite, both. There's a mixture. I mean, it can be quite close to, you'd say, oh, there'll be a tower there somewhere, but line of sight is important for the fixed tower, and if you haven't got line of sight, you're off the satellite and getting a dish on your roof.
Yeah. And just a final question from me, thanks, Chair. You talk about, and you've talked this morning about dealing with NBN, and in your submission you talk about the NBN's communications with customers should be a higher priority. I note that NBN's direct customers are the telcos, and then they. But do you think there needs to be NBN needs to engage better with, say, business chambers or local governments such as yourselves to not only notify about programs such as those that Mr. Passon discussed, but also just to understand what your needs are and how they can better deliver their product, even though they're going through the retail service providers?
I think, if I can, Senator, one of the issues that needs to be addressed here is that there's a lot of frustration experienced by users who go to their telco. The telco suggests it's an NBN problem. The NBN says it's not. It goes back to the telco. Now, I've worked in other capacities before coming here where I dealt with this problem. I feel that perhaps the best way forward for that particular issue would be a one-stop hotline where you ring or contact that number. Somebody with knowledge at the other end works out whether it's an NBN problem or it's a telco problem and assigns it to the relevant organisation with a deadline for return of call and resolution. Most of the experiences I've had or had reported to me have been they feel like there are tennis balls going between the two organisations, and we should ask ourselves, should it really be the customer having to go through this, or should it be someone in authority allocating the particular problem to the relevant organisation? So that's just something I believe would be a worthwhile issue to investigate.
Thank you.
And it would take a lot of the frustration out of people's lives.
Thanks. That's it from me, Chair. I don't know.
Thank you. I was going to ask Mr. Connolly or Senator Antic if they have anything.
I'm okay, thanks, Chair.
Senator Antic? Given that we've left him on the phone for an hour and a half, I'm not surprised he might be doing some other business.
Chair, if there's a moment, can I just follow up on a couple of points?
Happy to do that, but before you do, gentlemen, the Minister's office is listening, and they've sent me a text with an offer, and I just can tell you that the Minister's office is very keen to ensure and arrange a meeting between NBN Co and the Strathbogie Shire Direct. So I can see nodding. So we will, in my capacity as chair, liaise with Dr. Haynes and ensure that takes place. There are, as I've indicated, a number of opportunities available. I think whilst systematically, I think it's acknowledged that more needs to be done to socialise that information, and it's a frustration I share. I've got to say it's the reason why I've written to the 18 councils in my electorate, because I just am struggling with that dissemination and that socialisation, but from the particular parochial position of Strathbogie, let's get you in front of the pack.
Great, thank you.
Over to you, Madam Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wondered on that issue whether, given there are a lot of other councils and shires around the country who are facing similar issues and haven't necessarily been given that direct offer via the Minister's office, and I'm wondering what sort of resources or support you think smaller shires need to be able to put together the kind of information and arguments to be able to go for those competitive funds that the government has a limited pot of money on, or NBN and the government. What do they need? What would you need to be able to do that?
I think the offer of a collaborative approach is a great one. One of the things I think is forgotten about our small regional shires, of course, they usually have a small ratepayer base, and our financial capacity is quite small. When we see the words co-invest or co-contribution, we want to participate, but there are times where we have to question whether we're going to have the funds to really participate in some of these schemes. So I think if we were looking at the smaller shires with, say, a population of less than 20,000, greater consideration given to funding at a higher level than perhaps the bigger shires that have access to a greater funding base. A collaborative approach with state and federal government, local shire, we just feel that's a must. And bringing the business community and the community in general on board, because I don't know how much work is done by NBN Co with regard to finding out, and I'm not criticising them, I just don't know if they seriously investigate some of the issues encountered by residents, farmers, etc., businesses in smaller shires. So again, that's a conversation we'd love to have, and maybe set up some sort of mechanism where these problems are seen as in a holistic sense, not just a monetary sense.
And you put together a very comprehensive submission. Can you give us an idea of the amount of hours that was involved in, or person power involved in pulling that together?
I would possibly hand over to David Russell, who was the poor fellow that brought it all together for us.
David Russell speaking. I read the submission, and I'm an economic recovery officer here, so I'm not here on an ongoing basis. So it was a task that arose, and they said, well, let's do this. We saw the opportunity to make a submission. We knew that the community were concerned about the subject matter, so off I went. It takes weeks of effort to do such a thing. We made an effort also in surveying the business owners. I think that's really important to get the opinions, the direct opinions, and the quotes that are in the submission are the words directly of the business owners. So getting that connection, going to the businesses, making sure that they contributed, takes time and effort, but it's all worthwhile. It's part of our job.
I mean, we did have other staff involved as well, assisting David. So considerable manual personality involved in putting it all together. But we haven't quantified it.
And I only discovered, by the way, some of this information has gone onto the map in the last couple of weeks. We were struggling with mapping, and one of our, we have fantastic geospatial analysts on staff, and they produced the mapping. But I haven't seen that sort of mapping done elsewhere, so I think you might be interested in the source of that, which is at the top of the map. It's from NBN, but it's also on the data.gov.au website. But potentially other people would do the same in their own applications.
Well, yeah, it looked like it had taken you a lot of hours to pull all those different threads of information together. The last thing I wanted to ask was just around the intersection between the poor NBN performance and your mobile coverage. And I'm finding in my own electorate of the Blue Mountains and Hawkesbury, the seat of Macquarie, that this is a real problem, that if one is very strong, you might not be as reliant on the other, but with two underperforming networks, it's creating challenges. How big an issue is that when you look at holistically at your communications?
I think it's very substantial. I think if we again talking to our ratepayers, our businesses, they don't separate the two. They see if mobile phones not functioning, probably won't be able to access the internet either. And I think once you get outside of our major towns, it's a serious issue right across the LGA, the local government. I don't know, I think everybody here would agree on that.
Yep. Many people have mentioned to me that, they rely on coverage to do things on the internet, that when their internet's not working so well, it's satellite based, or because it's been changed of some kinds occurred, that's, they're looking for a service that's going to operate reliably. And these are not places that are remote or miles and miles from anywhere. It's just that they're just around the corner somewhere, around the hill over the valley or under the range, and they're cut off.
It's a very scary prospect in an emergency too.
Yeah, indeed. Look, thank you for that, Chair, and thank you all for your evidence.
Hello, thank you, gentlemen. Sorry, Ness, I need that back. Having made you feel so immensely special, I've received further information from the Minister's office. Well, I just want on the transcript, so for the benefit of all members. I'm told that the Minister has written to all federal and state MPs across these opportunities. He's also written to local council groups and chambers of commerce, and that the offer that I've extended to the Strathbogie Shire Council is available to all councils. So having made you feel particularly special, we'll facilitate yours, but I want it on the record. And can I also say, in my own case, and I'm sure this is the case for other members of Parliament in the House, I've been contacted by my local community engagement manager for NBN, who is looking, in my case, to liaise with my respective councils. I'm sure that's the case in relation to each member. So if anyone is listening on the web, reading the transcript, otherwise, then perhaps ask to speak with the local community engagement manager, or speak to your local member of Parliament to facilitate those things. Gentlemen, can I thank you very much for your submission. Can I thank you for your time? Unless any colleagues, including Dr. Haynes, have anything further to ask of you, I'm going to let you have the rest of the.
Thank you, Chair. And, thank you to Mr. Russell, Mr. Cooper and Mayor Rayburn, and we'll look forward to getting our sleeves rolled up together. Now, I think it's been a very good submission, and I thank you very, very much.
And I'd like to say thank you for allowing us to speak to you today. It's been a privilege, and I'd like to commend my staff on their great work to putting this proposal together for you guys to understand what's really going on out in the rural sector of our country.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. Feel free to leave us.
Okay, we'll leave feeling special.
Okay. With that, Lee, before I welcome representatives from the New South Wales Business Commissioner, can I just confirm I have myself, Dr. Haynes, and Madam Deputy Chair?
That's correct.
All right, well, let's continue with that. Sorry?
I'm still here.
Brian Mitchell.
Mr. Mitchell, thank you. I now welcome representatives from the New South Wales Small Business Commissioner. Thank you. Well, I understand it's Mr. Christopher Lamont, Commissioner. Thank you for taking the time, Mr. Lamont, to give evidence to the committee and for your submission. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses and evidence has been provided to you. Colleagues, there's some issue with Mr. Lamont's connection, so he's with us telephonically. For the Hansard record, could you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today? Mr. Lamont? Madam Secretary?
Good morning, Chair. I'm appearing as the New South Wales Small Business Commissioner, and my full name is Christopher Sean Lamont.
Thank you, Mr. Lamont. I now invite you to make a short opening statement. At the conclusion of your remarks, I will invite members of the committee to ask questions of you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to provide evidence today. The New South Wales Small Business Commissioner is an independent statutory office within the New South Wales Government. We are responsible for promoting the interests of small business in New South Wales. Functions and activities of the Commission include improving the operating environment for small business, receiving and handling complaints, providing low-cost alternate dispute resolution services, and advocating on behalf of small business with a view to improving the regulatory environment or improving business conditions. In New South Wales, small businesses make up more than 97.5% of all businesses in the state and employ some 1.6 million people, or around 41% of the state's private sector workforce. Given the experiences of many small businesses over the past 12 months, this inquiry is particularly timely. Increasingly, the Commission has seen small businesses expand and strengthen their digital capability to explore new markets, work differently, or deliver services in new ways. This appears to have accelerated over the last 12 months in response to the impacts of floods, bushfires, and the COVID-19 pandemic. The Commission conducted a survey series earlier this year to the extent to which small businesses were looking to move online or expand their existing online presence. Almost 1 in 5 of the 5,000 businesses surveyed advised that they had moved online or had expanded their online business during the period February to October. If these results reflect the actions of small businesses across New South Wales, we could expect that more than 140,000 small businesses in New South Wales have moved online or sought to expand their online presence during this period. I do note that business groups and indeed small businesses themselves have noted improvements in the quality of internet services in recent years. However, the importance of these services to small business has also increased, making any disruption to internet services more impactful and potentially damaging to those businesses and the economy. This is particularly the case when we look at online sales that are more critical these days to small business and peak seasons and trading times, and the impact of disruptions to these times can have long-term impacts for small businesses. Once again, I'd like to thank you, Committee and Chair, for the opportunity to present to this inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Lamont. Mr. Lamont, we're a committee made up of the various parties that exist within the federal parliament, namely the Australian Labor Party, the Coalition, and the minor and independent parties. We ascribe time in this committee. We try to at least evenly amongst those three groups. I'm going to put you in the capable hands of Madam Deputy Chair, Ms. Templeman, and then she will pass over to Dr. Haynes, representing the independent minor parties, and we'll round out with some questions from coalition members. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you very much for your evidence. Look, I've come to this Parliament from 25 years in small business, and when NBN was first talked about, I saw it as something that would transform my business, which was a training company. Instead of having to fly overseas for my clients, I'd be able to deliver stuff via video conferencing, not just overseas, but also, more readily within Australia. So I've been a close follower of this system from the word go. And what I hear from small business is that it hasn't, for many of them, been as transformative as they would like it to be. So I'm really interested in your recommendation around working with the RSPs and NBN to develop new or reviewed offers catering specifically to the needs of small business, because small businesses don't all have the same needs, do they?
No, look, I think that's an excellent point. Unfortunately, many small businesses also don't necessarily have a degree of technological information or understanding of what they're purchasing. Increasingly, we hear that the packages that are offered by RSPs are not well understood and may not be suitable for small businesses, or might be suitable at a period of time, but if they add more online and in the cloud software packages and business support tools, a package that was fine 6 months ago may not be for that business going forward. So we see that matching of product, that matching of service with the needs of small business as increasingly important as more businesses go online and expand their engagement through online and the internet.
It does seem, and you've pointed to this, that businesses tend to choose based on a price point rather than the capacity. So if you're thinking about the different needs of small business, whether they have a heavy video conferencing need or a heavy upload of, if they're an internet-based retailer, for instance, what are some of the things that your members are telling you they'd like to see in the packages that they get offered?
Well, one of the things that we've heard directly is that if they're running multiple platforms, so these days, even the most humblest of cafes might have a entertainment system that's plugged into the internet. They'll have a point of sale system. They might have an accounting system. What they'd like to see is that if they purchased package A from an RSP, will that package be able to service and support those platforms for that business? We think that small businesses choose many times the cheapest option because there just isn't enough information. So the purchase becomes one almost of a grudge nature. So they're trying the first package without really understanding whether it suits their business or not. And in addition to that, they're not understanding that the additional or more expensive packages might actually suit their business needs more. It's not explained in a way that is practical to them. Some people understand gigabytes and transfer rates and data exchanges better than others. And I suggest that many small businesses are more focused on their small business.
When you talk small businesses, can you just paint the picture of the spread of the businesses that you've been able to get feedback from about this issue?
Look, principally at the moment we're talking to retailers, but retail extends into the hospitality sector. I've mentioned cafes in particular, hotels, motels with bookings. We've also spoken to manufacturing businesses and indeed businesses in both metro, regional and remote centres of New South Wales.
Do you have much engagement with home-based businesses?
A little. They tend to be harder to locate, so it's only when we see a dispute or we're going to a particular forum or event where we get to meet home-based businesses. They tend to have a special suite of challenges which almost usually rely in this space on the use of essentially a residential style package for home internet, which then is either not suitable or has issues with reliability to support a business.
Which suggests you'd probably be supportive of some specialist packages targeted at that small business as well.
Absolutely. I think there's real value in just explaining what these packages are, but also their suitability for the application of a particular small business, whether that be home-based or larger businesses that have multiple software platforms or requirements of the internet.
One of the things that comes up when I speak to small businesses, no matter where they are, is the reliability of the service. How much does that play out? I notice your recommendation number 2 is about ensuring minimum performance standards, and presumably that includes not just speeds but also dropouts and essentially reliability.
Yeah, I heard your previous speaker or presenter providing evidence around the exchange between NBN and RSPs. We hear that a lot. Small business will phone their RSP to be transferred to the NBN and then back again. That is frustrating. It becomes even more frustrating when your point of sale machines are reliant upon a functioning and operating internet service. So that is really key. Also, we saw it last year and early this year with bushfires, with services reaching peak and exceeding peak demand, placing small businesses in some degree of risk around how they connect and how they maintain a business.
Can you just explain that a little bit more around the bushfire experience, which obviously my region had the Gospers Mountain Fire, but what was it businesses are telling you there?
Businesses, two camps. Businesses were telling us that the system was overloading in terms of the number of people attempting to use the network, meant that there were reliability concerns with the network for their operations. There were also reports, although I can't confirm, that there was damage to equipment during the bushfires, which also made it difficult to connect or to retain and maintain reliable connections.
Just picking up on that idea of damage to connections or to the network during natural disasters, have you had reports from small businesses about storms affecting the boxes that operate there? And I'm hearing this in fibre to the curb situations where FTTC they're telling me that when storms are happening, they're seeing quite a high level of outage and the whole box having to be replaced, and that means that their business and their connectivity is out of action for a period of time, depending on how quickly NBN Co can replace that box. It's started coming through to me because we're in storm season, and my region has only fairly recently had FTTC rolled out in parts of it. Have you had any feedback to that effect?
I haven't heard anything specifically to that nature. We have heard concerns raised, particularly in regional and remote locations, about the impact of storms on reliability, particularly when major towers are understood to already have some issue in terms of servicing the surrounding area, and concerns, this is particularly with mobile coverage and concerns where you have peak periods. A lot of people have chosen to travel west and more remotely during COVID, given limitations elsewhere. And there have been reports that the system has struggled to cope with the additional visitors in a particular location or area, and that has had impact on businesses and the reliability of internet connectivity and phone connectivity.
One of the questions I asked the previous witnesses was about that interrelationship between mobile phone and internet capabilities, and whether you've got reports from the businesses you're representing that obviously if the internet goes down, they rely very heavily on their mobile phones, and whether that is a complicating issue for their internet connectivity if the NBN goes down.
Yeah, that definitely has been raised. Once again, principally in regional or remote locations, adding pressure to that. In some respects, requirements on businesses to satisfy COVID health regulations and to meet their requirements in that area. So that has been an issue that's been raised, particularly in the last 3 to 4 months.
Look, the other area I wanted to ask you about was the, I guess, the digital literacy, but more than just literacy, the digital capacity of small businesses to be able to use NBN, really use its capabilities when it is working well, when they have fibre to the premises, when everything is going right. Is that something, because that's what this inquiry originally, that's what we began looking at in this inquiry prior to COVID. Do you have some thoughts around what you're seeing small business could do, not just in getting a technology that supports their existing needs, but in really using a high-speed broadband service to expand their businesses? I'm just interested in your thoughts.
We're seeing a lot of businesses, particularly the very small businesses, save costs by using and adopting online technology to both save time in terms of travel, but expense associated with that. We're seeing more high volume files being shared quickly through traditional forms of email and through other devices and software platforms as well. Look, it's fair to say that the small business community that we speak to regularly see enormous potential and have experienced enormous benefit already from adopting online technologies. The rapid adoption of conferencing, video conferencing and the like has seen in the businesses that we speak to many and several benefits that will last for years to come. So it has been somewhat of a bit of a revolution, and I mentioned before to the survey where it wasn't possible for many businesses to continue to trade under previous business models. 1 in 5 changing their business model, adopting a greater online presence, or going online for the first time. So whether they did that with a sense of aspiration or whether they did that simply to survive, I suspect there's probably a number of cases to reflect those stats. But there is a sense of optimism, and I think there is a sense of hope that the internet, not just during COVID, but will provide more business opportunities for small business in particular.
And what would small businesses need to see in terms of policy or changes or support to really be able to fulfil that optimistic vision?
Look, I think the comment before about the nature of packages and how they can help will go some way. Understanding what packages contain and how they plug in or support business software and online applications would be a good way to assist them. An emerging concern, though, also is cyber security and the extent to which business, particularly small business, are not aware of the potential threats of cyber security on their business. There is also reluctance for some of perhaps the older generation of business operators in small business to go online because they hear the threats without understanding necessarily the approaches that can be adopted and ought to be adopted to insulate them from those risks.
And when we do our recommendations out of this inquiry, what would you like to see around that emerging concern about fibre security for small business?
I think I've seen some excellent programs from the federal and the state government. I think the benefit would be in the short term of trying to make people more aware, particularly small business, are more aware of the support that is available. There is so much information now coming from so many different sources that for a small business operator that is spending so much time in their business, it's very difficult to keep and to stay across all the information that's coming out. But the threat of cyber security is real and it needs to be understood by every small business operator who will increasingly have some access and some exposure to it.
You talk about small businesses, being caught working in their business rather than on their businesses. In terms of their internet usage and the different sources, who would be the most trusted source of information to be the conduit for these sorts of things, do you think, for the small businesses that you deal with? You might say yourself.
Look, I think it's a mix. I think there is a very high level of respect and trust with government at all levels, whether that be state or federal. Certainly, I would say the Office of the New South Wales Small Business Commissioner is a trusted source, but as are local chambers of commerce and industry groups. So I think a push on all fronts would assist in getting that message out.
Okay. Chair, I have not been keeping track of time, and it's possibly time for somebody else to ask questions, although I could happily keep going.
That's okay. Dr. Haynes?
Thanks, Chair, and Ms Templeman has been very comprehensive. I really just have one question, and that was, could you comment, please, just on your reflections between rural and regional businesses and metro, notwithstanding you said there were some similarities, but is there anything that you would highlight to us that was particular to the rural locations?
Dr. Hayne, I would point out that some of the regional and more remote businesses have been, in some respects, and this is in no way derogatory towards them, but late adopters of technology and are probably experiencing some of the pains that come with that adoption more recently than what some of the businesses have already gone through in the metro and other locations. So we, at the Commission, and indeed across various levels of government, I guess should remind ourselves that we're not all approaching this from a business point of view at the same time, and that regional and remote businesses in the last 12 months might be experiencing a transition for the first time to the NBN or adopting technology that has been in the field for quite some time more recently, and that obviously comes with it some challenges for them.
Mr. Lamont, would you think that given this and given the rapid push that many of these small businesses have had to make with COVID, do you think they need more support? Is there more training and development that could be delivered out into rural and regional small businesses to assist them in this transition, given that they have started a little behind the eight ball, as you suggest?
Yeah, we'd always support more training and information. Information in particular. Sometimes it's not training. Sometimes it's just being aware of where to get information, how to understand. I mentioned those various packages of internet packages that are available and that are advertised. Understanding what that means. How many devices can I operate? How does this plug into my particular farming equipment or my software accounting package? Putting the information out there in a way that small business can understand, try and avoid the technical jargon, which many of these small businesses will simply not understand.
Have you had any experience, Mr. Lamont, with working with local government economic development officers, for example, as conduits to such information? Would that be something that you've seen or you'd recommend, whereby informational workshops could be channeled through those eco-dev offices, which I know many chambers of business communicate with pretty regularly? Or would you suggest that this needs to come directly from NBN or the ISPs?
Look, I think a collaborative approach, but certainly a trusted source are those economic development officers in local government, as with local chambers. But a true partnership between all of the parties, perhaps facilitated by local chambers or by local councils, would be a good approach.
Thanks very much, Mr. Lamont. That's all I have.
Mr. Lamont, I don't have anything for you. I'm going to thank you for your time. I don't believe you've been asked to provide any additional information, but if I missed anything, then 4 weeks from the date of the transcript being provided to you, you will, of course, get the transcript, and I encourage you to submit any or correct any transcription errors. With that, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Colleagues, we have 15 minutes till our next witness. I'm just going to give us an opportunity to have a short break. I'm sure nobody's going to be concerned about that. So back in 15 minutes, ready to go at 11:45.
Thanks.
With that, I now welcome Mr. Laurie Patton. Thank you, Mr. Patton, for appearing before the committee today. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses evidence has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, Mr. Patton, could you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today?
I'm Laurie Patton and I'm appearing in my own right. I am the former Vice President of TELSOC and previously the Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of Internet Australia.
I now invite you to make a short opening statement at the conclusion of your remarks. I'll invite members of the committee to ask questions of you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, I will be very brief. I thank members of the committee for allowing me to appear today. And I note, Mr. Chairman, that you weren't all that keen on hearing from me, but there you go.
I'm sorry, Mr. Patton. At what point have I indicated that I wasn't keen on hearing from you? I'm sorry.
In the letter you wrote to me, but let's move on. You didn't want to see me.
No, not at all, Mr. Patton. Let's be clear, Mr. Patton, because I don't want to start on this basis. And I'm going to be incredibly fair to you, and I'd ask you not misrepresent me. I indicated
misrepresenting you, sir. You wrote to me and said that you weren't interested in hearing from me. I'm happy to table that letter. Now, what I would say is that I'm now coming
Mr.
to
Patton, we're not going to work, Mr. Patton. Mr. Patton, we're not going to work this way. Mr. Patton.
This is my turn to speak. You said it was my turn to speak. Can I speak, please? And you can have as much time as you want. I'm coming to you now.
Patton,
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Patton. No, Mr. Patton, I will conduct this meeting. You will give evidence to this meeting.
Yes, that's what I'm here for.
The letter that was provided to you is amongst the committee material, but I'm not going to have you misrepresent mine or the committee's position. That letter that was sent to you by the committee. Proceed, Mr. Patton.
Thank you very much, but I will note that the committee then reconvened and voted in favour of seeing me. So I'm very pleased to be here. And look, I tell you that I'm coming to you via the Telstra 5G network, because if I was trying to do it on the NBN, we wouldn't be able to hear each other. This morning, my NBN connection was battling to provide 15 megabits per second. My 5G Telstra network gives me anywhere around 350 megabits per second. And I think that sums up the problem that we're dealing with. Basically, what we've got is we've got millions of people who are stuck with a broadband network which is just not up to scratch. It's cost us, we think now, given the rubbery figures that we get out of NBN, somewhere around $60 billion, I think we're up to now, for a version of the network that was supposed to cost about $29 billion. Now, in the hearing to which I now refer, you obviously came along with a bucket job for me and I wasn't there, so I apologise for not being able to be the victim. You wanted to know whether the views that I was expressing were the views of TELSOC. Well, look, first of all, I think the views that I was expressing are widely held by members of TELSOC. More importantly, I can tell you that about 5 years ago, we did a survey of the members of Internet Australia, and more than 80% of the members of Internet Australia made it very clear that they didn't think fibre to the node was much chop and really wasn't worth persevering with. I also note that in an earlier report, your very committee recommended effectively that the government abandon fibre to the node. And I note that the National Party member on the committee at that time supported the other members in that resolution. And I think that, if anybody thinks that broadband is difficult in the city, to quote one of my other articles, it's buggered in the bush. And I'm coming to you from the bush. Now, I think what I really want to say to the committee is two things. Firstly, we need to move on. And I give Minister Fletcher full credit for having accepted the reality that his predecessors have given him a lemon out of which he's trying to make lemonade. I don't think anybody believes that the $4.5 billion that's now been allocated to fix the network will A, be enough, and B, fix the network. But what I really wanted to do was to reiterate what I've been saying for at least the last 5 years. We need a bipartisan national plan to fix the NBN and bring it into the 21st century. And a second point, which I was quoted in an article which I'll send to you, in the New Daily just this week. In the event that the government decides, or any government decides, to privatise the NBN, then we have to be very careful about how we do that, because we don't want to end up with another privately owned monolith. We really need to go back to the original premise, which was that everybody should get broadband, and clearly there are millions of Australians who are not getting broadband, and we need to move on, forget about the past. As I say, I acknowledge the Minister's good sense in realising that he needs to fix it. He just needs to fix it a little quicker.
Thank you for your opening remarks. Ms Templeman.
And I'm going to ask Mr Mitchell if he would like to ask some questions of Mr Patton.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Thank you, Chair. Mr Patton, I do have some questions. Brian Mitchell, member for Lions in Tasmania. Mr Patton, how would you say the broadband experience of Australia has fared compared to New Zealand?
Oh, well, look, in New Zealand, it's just a straightforward case of what we should have done. They continued to work with fibre, and the last time I checked, I think they'd reduced their per premises costs by nearly 50%. I think that they've said by 2025, I think it is, 80 or 90% of New Zealanders will be able to receive broadband speeds in the gigabit range. And I know that people will say that New Zealand is much smaller. Yeah, sure. And Australia was much bigger when we, 150 years ago, we decided that everyone should have a telephone. So, I think New Zealand has really shown us the way forward.
Thank you. And what trends have been seen overseas generally in terms of the costs of fibre to the premises deployment?
Look, I'm not across all of the details of every country that's doing this, but what I can say is that the latest information I saw was that 80% of broadband new builds globally are now being rolled out with fibre. And I think around the world, everybody has now got to the point where they've recognised that it's just counterproductive to roll out anything else. And I think New Zealand is the classic example where they just kept on working out how to do things cheaper, economies of scale, and I think they've reduced their costs by 50%. I don't think anybody in the engineering world believes the numbers that NBN quote for what they say it's costing them to roll out fibre.
You were just fairly congratulatory towards Minister Fletcher about, I can't remember the term you used, but making lemonade out of the lemon that he was handed. What do you make of the fact that the government has now reversed course to some degree? I don't share the view of many that they've pretty much gone into full reverse, and they're obviously not going to offer a full fibre solution. They're offering a partial fibre solution for those who are willing to pay for it. But what do you make of the fact that the government's now reversed course? Do you see it as an admission that what they were rolling out was deficient?
Oh, I think it's a total capitulation, but it's a bit half-hearted. If you roll back probably 4 or 5 years before this committee, or perhaps it was in Senate estimates, I can't remember, the then Chief Executive Bill Morrow was asked, he had to be asked somewhat repeatedly and tersely, what about people who've got fibre to the node who'd like to have fibre to the premises? And his answer was pretty straightforward. Well, they'll just have to pay for it. Now, what I think we've got now, and I do congratulate Minister Fletcher for realising that he needs to fix it. But what he's done now is he's basically allocated 4.5 billion to extend the fibre further into the network. But the cost of taking the fibre from the street into the premises is still being visited on the poor, luckless subscriber. And I liken it a bit to this. You can buy the latest smartphone for a couple of $1,000s, or you can pay $90 or thereabouts a month to effectively buy it in instalments. And what they've done now is they've really just done what Bill Morrow said. They've said, if you want to go from fibre to the node to fibre to the premises, well, you're just going to have to pay for it. The only thing is, instead of charging you up front, we're going to allow you to do it progressively. Now, just recently, I was contacted by somebody who had a quote for, I think it was $15,000, but we've heard quotes anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 to $30,000 to $40,000 for people who've asked NBN Co, can they have fibre? So I guess it's better, this current scheme, but it still means that people who want to have a decent broadband network when they're stuck with fibre to the node are going to have to pay for it, whereas millions of other Australians who are very lucky in the first instance and got fibre to the premises don't have to pay extra.
And given those examples you just mentioned of, wildly variable quotes for upgrading to premises, how would you describe the business case efficiency for the way that the NBN is now being deployed?
Look, I think we have to go back to basics. 100 years ago, we decided that everyone should have a telephone. If we hadn't done that in the way that we did by subsidising it through the government, then we'd still have people out there waiting to get a telephone, I suspect. The whole point of having a national broadband network is that it cross-subsidises, so that there are some installations that are very quick and cheap and there are others that are more complicated. And I think what we've really got now is just I can't think of a better word to say it than it's a bastardised system. It's not what we started out with, and it's not what we would end up with if we started again.
And a last one from me before I go to Ms. Templeman. You're saying, I think you were saying you are speaking to us today from the bush. Given where the NBN is now, and even with these changes that Minister Fletcher has announced, with the extra billions dollars being made available to go into fibre to the premises, where do you see the digital divide between the regions and the cities? Is it getting worse or getting better?
I don't think it's getting better. We don't know where that $4.5 billion is going to be spent yet. But what we do know is that people in the bush are substantially worse off. I mean, there are places like Ballarat, for example, where one side of the street's got fibre and the other side of the street's got old copper wires. And we've got whole towns that were originally going to get fibre that are now stuck with fibre to the node. So, I think one of the difficulties that we have is the information is pretty sketchy. And so we don't really know where the money will be spent. So we don't know how much of that will be spent in the city and how much of that will be spent in the bush.
Well, thank you very much. That's it from me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mitchell. Mr. Patton, thank you for some of the detail in there. Can I ask you, so a few years ago, the government was saying that no consumers didn't need and wouldn't use higher speeds and would only use them if it was free. And in spite of that now, they are, what do you make of the fact that NBN Co is really trying to promote gigabit speeds?
Well, the problem that we've always faced is you do not talk about what you need now. You talk about what we'll need in the future. And we don't know what devices we're going to need in the future. 15 years ago, we didn't know what an iPad was. We don't know what technologies are going to be required in the future. A good example of that, and again, to give the government fair credit, they've extended the telehealth concessions so that people can use telehealth if they are in a remote area or they have a disability. But one of the things we've found is that you need very high-speed broadband if you're going to exchange high-resolution scans between a doctor and a specialist. So really, New Zealand, for example, has just bitten the bullet and said, okay, well, we don't necessarily all need gigabit speeds now, but we will in the future, and we will constantly need faster speeds. The problem is by the time we work out that we haven't got what we need, it'll be too late. It's probably too late now, except that, we can start rebuilding it. And to talk about what speeds are necessary at a particular time just seems to me to be, a foolhardy exercise.
I want to ask you about the Foxtel pay TV network and whether, in your opinion, the decision to use that and copper has actually saved taxpayers money.
Oh, look, I think Foxtel has been a diminishing asset for some time now because they stuck with the high premiums and the multi channels rather than reduce it and have more specialised services. I think the streaming services are now eating their lunch, which is why they've now started in the streaming business themselves. I think the issue of streaming really is again one where we need to take lessons from the United States, where of course net neutrality has been a hot topic. Obviously, it costs the telcos or the RSPs a lot more money to provide bandwidth for people who are streaming. For example, where I live now, we watch everything on the internet because just because of the topography, we don't get a decent free-to-air signal. So, I think again this comes back to the digital divide. Do we just simply provide a good service for some people and the other people just have to miss out?
So what savings might there have been, though, by using that existing copper, albeit having to buy a lot more copper, and the pay TV infrastructure?
Well, I'm not entirely sure where you're heading on this question, but I mean, I just come back to the basics. The copper network, everybody who had anything to do with Telstra knew that Telstra had worked out a long time ago that fibre was the future and wasn't maintaining the copper network. The same with the pay TV, the HFC network. And this is where I really think the government was let down by the communications department. Drew Clark, who was the secretary at the time, is now on the board of NBN Co. He's not an engineer, but surely there are engineers in the communications department that knew that the broadband over copper wasn't going to work. But they must have also known that the HFC wasn't in very good condition, and so they've had to completely abandon the Optus HFC network, and it's cost $1 squillion to fix up those parts of the Telstra HFC network that they can remediate. Where I've just moved from in the inner city of Sydney, I had Telstra HFC. It's about to be ripped out and replaced by fibre to the curb. Ironically, whoever lives in the house I've just sold is going to get about half the broadband speeds over the NBN that I was getting over the HFC. But I was in a good area. I was close to an exchange, and the HFC cable was in pretty good condition.
So in the long term, not a good economic strategy by sticking to those.
The remediation costs, which are largely buried in the labyrinthian finances of NBN Co. The remediation costs of copper and HFC are one of the reasons why a project that the communications department told the government of the day would cost $29 billion is now fast approaching $60 billion and is by no means finished.
Just in terms of HFC then and the use of it, how would you sum up, now that we've got the benefit of seeing what's had to happen now, that decision to use the HFC?
Well, I think it's common knowledge that the majority of the experts that were advising the government when the NBN was launched dismissed HFC. It wasn't even in the original mix. It was only when the multi-technology mix MES was created that HFC was introduced. So it's cost us a fortune. It's given some people better broadband than they might have got with copper, but it's nowhere near capable of keeping up with fibre.
Now, interestingly, Mr. Patton, the signal is weakening and we've lost your video, but I think we still have your voice. Yeah, you might be back. Or not.
Well, even 5G has its issues.
Can I just ask you then, in terms of the economics of it, how would you contrast the long-term economics of copper versus fibre?
Oh, it's just a joke. We're spending $4 to start fixing it. I've seen estimates that are much bigger than that. Look, in the end, there's no doubt that we will end up rebuilding this network. But look, in the end, we just need to move forward. We need to accept that it's cost us twice as much to get to where we are. It's a government infrastructure project, which is why the idea of selling off to Telstra or anybody else makes no sense. We just need to fix it. We just need to make it work. And that's going to cost a lot of money. And we just need to go forward and forget about the past and say, look, no, that's that.
Just finally, can I just
one last
ask,
one, Ms. Templeman, you will pass this on.
Sure, sorry. Just can I ask, you've congratulated the government on some of the minister on some of the decisions going forward. So what is your list of priorities going forward for the NBN?
Oh, look, I think the first thing to do is to just get the board to accept that what they've been advocating to the government needs to change. We know that from the evidence that Mr. Morrow gave some time ago, a proposition was put to the NBN board that they should move from copper to fibre, and it was rejected. We just need the government to direct NBN Co to get on with the job of fixing the NBN, and that means replacing as much of the copper with fibre as they can, and that can be fibre to the curb. We haven't had a debate about the various different forms of fibre, but just to be fair, when Labor introduced its version in 2007, fibre to the curb didn't exist, nor did it exist really in 2013. It's not proving to be as good as people hoped, but at least if you put the fibre into the street, then
We just missed the last few words of that sentence. We got up to at least if you put fibre into the street.
At least then there's a reasonably cheap and effective means of getting fibre to everybody. A good example of this is that if you go back, I can't really remember, 30 or 40 years, nobody was allowed to touch the copper wire inside your house, much less in the street, unless they worked for telecom. And then we brought in a system where licensed electricians could install telephone lines in the house. So we probably need to get to the situation where people can actually subcontract somebody to take fibre from the street into the house. And depending upon how they opt to do that, that can be done a lot more efficiently than having the NBN people do it.
Thank you, Mr. Patton.
Over to you, Dr. Haynes.
Chair, I have no further questions.
Okay, so over to me, Mr. Patton. Mr. Patton, I want to give you an opportunity to correct your misstatement to the committee regarding me and my supposed attitude to your evidence or hearing from you. Mr. Patton, before I do, can I say to you, I've had an occasion while you've been giving evidence in answer to Ms. Templeman and Mr. Mitchell's questions to refresh my memory from the document. It's a letter to you, Mr. Patton, from the committee, in which I indicate to you as chair of the committee that it is the committee's decision on whether you would be able to appear as requested, and that in the meanwhile, the committee has asked that you clarify in writing any concerns you have. Now, Mr. Patton, you indicated in your evidence that I was not keen for you to give evidence. Would you like to withdraw that statement now?
Look, I'll just let the news what happens. So
No,
I'll just
Mr.
leave
Patton,
that.
I'm not going to allow you to do that. You have given what I say is false and misleading evidence. I'm going to give you an opportunity.
Oh, I'm not suggesting it's false and misleading. I merely said that I got the impression that you weren't keen on having me
Mr.
here.
Patton, we can go
I
around in
think that's
circles.
past history.
Mr. Patton, we can go
You
around in
asked me to answer a
circles.
question. You're going to let me answer it, or are you just going to keep talking over me?
No, I'm going to put to you.
You asked me to address an issue. Are you going to keep talking over me, or are you going to let me respond?
Mr. Patton, you just indicated now that you said you were given the impression. That is not your evidence, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to withdraw your statement.
I'm happy to withdraw. I'm happy to withdraw. I'm happy to withdraw, sir, if it makes you feel good. I will just make you. I will
It doesn't
just
make me feel good, Mr. Patton. I'm giving you an opportunity because there are very serious ramifications from misleading a committee of the Parliament.
I'm not misleading the committee, and I've withdrawn. I've withdrawn, sir. But if I'm allowed to continue, sir, I will make the point that you attacked me in a previous hearing when I wasn't there. You wanted to know whether my views were the views of Telsoc. You were quite aggressive about it, sir, and that's all in the Hansard. I withdraw. If you're happy for me to be here, I'm extremely happy to be here. I think the facts speak for themselves, sir. We're fast approaching $60 billion on a $29 billion project. What I've said over and over again is we need a bipartisan approach. I congratulate Paul Fletcher on realising that needs to happen and starting the process. And I just hope that this committee will recommend to the government that they tell NBN Co it's time that they moved as fast as they can to redress the problems in the bush and in the cities and give us a 21st century better broadband network.
Thank you, Mr. Patton, for accepting that you, in your evidence, misled the committee.
I did not accept that at all. I withdrew it and I did not accept that at all. Don't verbal me.
Sorry, I want to be clear. Do you accept your statement that I, in some capacity, was not inclined to hear from you is a statement of fact or a misrepresentation?
It's neither. It's my impression.
Do you accept that's not what you said at the beginning of your evidence?
That was a long time ago. If that's the impression that you got, then I withdraw. And I just say that I simply got the impression from the letter that I received from you that you weren't inclined to hear from me. And I welcome the fact that the committee has agreed to let me be here today. And I wish you well.
Mr. Patton, I want to be really, really clear with you. I'm giving you an opportunity because your evidence, I'm concerned, is a misrepresentation and there are serious...
I've withdrawn. How many times do you want me to withdraw?
I want you to be clear that you accept that at no point was I... No, sorry, Mr. Mitchell, I'm not. At no point was I disinclined, but I wrote you as chair of the committee as directed by the committee.
I can't add anything. All I can say is I got a letter from you in which I got the impression that you weren't interested in hearing from me, and I subsequently welcome the opportunity of the committee to be here today.
Now,
also, repeat the fact that you attacked me. Do you withdraw the attack that you made on me?
Not at all. I was asking questions of Telsoc. No, I'm sorry, Mr. Patton.
I think this is kind of...
We might double down here, mate. Mr. Patton, my question to you is this. So I want to be clear. You're no longer the VP of Telsoc, is that right?
Yes, my term ended about a month ago.
Did you seek a further term with them? Sorry, do I have to repeat that, Mr.?
No, I did not.
Right. And did any of... were you...
Come on, if
were you counsel... Sorry? I think we've lost Mr. Patton. Mr. Patton, sorry, what was that?
Hello, are you still...
Yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me, Mr. Patton?
I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty hearing you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yes.
Okay, can you hear me, Mr. Patton?
I can hear you, yes.
Excellent. So were you at any point subsequent to the hearing of this
I can
committee.
hear you.
Can you hear me? Mr. Patton, my question to you is, were you at any point counselled by...
I can hear you.
Okay, I'm seeking to put a question to you. Mr. Patton, were you at any time counselled subsequent to the appearance before this committee by Telsop representatives regarding the representation of your views as Telsop's views? Okay.
No? If we can just go back a second. I remember from reading the transcript from Hansard that you referred to an article and you wanted to know whether the article reflected the views of Telsop. And my recollection is that you dropped this bucket on me but couldn't remember what the article was. But the
I'm happy
article
to send you the
to which you were, I believe, referring very clearly, the article that you referred to very clearly said at the bottom, as have all of my articles, anyone wants to read on my blog site, theluckygeneral.biz, they all made it clear that they were my views, not views of Telsop. I couldn't understand exactly what your point was back then, and I still can't.
Well, with respect, Mr. Patton, you signed off regularly as VP Telsop, hence to give the impression. But let's move on. Can I deal
in relation? Don't verbal me, Chair. I never signed off on anything as being the views of Telsop that weren't approved by the board. And every article I wrote.
Where?
I think your bucket job's failing, but keep going.
Mr. Patton, I'd ask you to refrain from the pejorative terms. You are an individual. Our committee's given you the respect of hearing from me, but if you want to continue to use pejorative terms, feel free. I'm trying to be as respectful as I can. I'd ask that you return.
I appreciate that, but you seem to want to attack me. So
Mr. Patton, I'm sorry, but in a former life, I was a defence counsel. My job is to get to the facts, and I'll get to them. But I'll seek to do it as respectfully as possible. Now, Mr. Patton, you sought to use New Zealand as a comparison in terms of its rollout of the technology versus the Australian experience. Now, New Zealand is a country of 268,000 square kilometres or thereabout. You'd accept that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've been through this. I made the point, sir, that you can't compare New Zealand or Australia on a size basis. It just means that you need to have a bigger workforce if you want to go into... So
do you think it's a fair comparison, Mr.
We got a telephone system. We got a telephone service 100 years ago. We didn't say, New Zealand can do it quicker than us, let's not bother.
Mr. Patton, do you think it's a fair comparison to compare a nation with 5 million people stretched across 268,000 kilometres with the demands of a nation of 26 million people spread amongst 7.6 million square kilometres or 29 times the geographic size? I mean, that's not a fair comparison, is it?
Well, look, with the greatest of respect, sir, I'm not comparing the size of the choice of technology. I'm merely saying that they've chosen to use fibre and we should have chosen to use fibre.
But those decisions are made easier. But you would accept...
Are you going to talk to me or can I speak?
Sorry.
No, we're talking about the competitive advantage of New Zealand, which has gigabit speeds, versus large parts of Australia that are battling to get 20 or 30 megabits per second. We've already had examples of cities in New Zealand that have actively come to Australia to try to steal our IT people. And one of the things they've said is you can get better broadband where you are in New Zealand. So it's not about the size. We didn't say 100 years ago, Australia is much bigger than New Zealand. Oh, well, let's not roll out a telephone service. And as I've said to you before, New Zealand has reduced their per premises by nearly 50%. Now, it's the per premises cost that matters. It's not the total cost, it's the per premises cost. And if we had continued with fibre, we could have been rolling out fibre for pretty much what it's costing us to roll out substandard technologies. That's the point.
Mr. Patton, you're not seriously contending, are you, that size doesn't matter in determining two things? One, what type of technology is cost effective? And two, the cost of rolling out that technology. You're not contending that size doesn't matter, are you? Because that would be ridiculous.
I'm not, and please stop trying to verbal me.
Well, I'm trying to understand what you say. You say that New Zealand is an appropriate comparator. We should just ignore the fact that Australia is almost 30 times larger by size.
Yes, but their workforce required to roll out a broadband network is proportionately less than the size of ours. It's not about how big the country is. It's not about how many people there are. It's about whether the technology works. And clearly, fibre to the node does not work in far too many places. All of the information to that is well and truly on the record. Fibre, HFC, Optus had to be completely and utterly abandoned, and most of the Telstra network, or a large part of the Telstra network, is now being replaced. HFC network is being replaced. So clearly we went down the wrong track. All I'm saying is let's have a bipartisan approach. Let's put the past behind us. Let's do what the minister is doing. Stop defending the past. Let's go. We need to fix this, and let's move forward.
But Mr. Patton, population density does matter, doesn't it? I mean, we just heard evidence from a local council where I think the numbers were 300,000 square kilometres, 100,000 constituents. I mean, that's an area larger than the size of New Zealand. And to suggest that a fibre could be rolled out cost competitively in that way, in the same, comparatively, the same as New Zealand with a much higher, incredibly higher population density, just is fanciful, isn't it?
Why do you keep trying to verbal me?
No, I'm asking you a question. I'm giving you an opportunity to respond.
Are you going to keep talking over me, or are you going to ask me questions and let me answer them?
I'm asking a question.
Well, think about it. Think about it. You're supposed to be on this committee. You must have heard the evidence from other people. Surely we use satellite and we use fixed wireless for the areas that are too disparate for a fibre connection. If we can roll a copper connection out to somebody's home, then we can roll a fibre connection out, right? That's the simple fact. The size of the country is not relevant. Where the size of the country is relevant, we're using satellite and we're using fixed wireless, and I don't know what on earth you're talking about.
Well, Mr. Patton, let's move on. In relation to the $4.5 billion network upgrade, on the 25th of September, in an, quote, AU manufacturing blog, you stated as follows: unfortunately, fibre is only going to be rolled out, quote, on demand, close quote, and will come at a much higher monthly subscription, although the specifics on this remain unclear. Of course, when Bill Morrow was still CEO, he foreshadowed exactly this scenario. Morrow told the Parliamentary NBN committee that if people wanted high-speed internet, they needed to pay for it. Mr. Patton, it's pretty simple, isn't it? It's pretty simple economics. Isn't it that when someone demands a higher class of service, that they need to pay for it? Just as an entry-level product today would retail for about $50 or $60, 50 megabit plan, and around $70 a month for a 100 megabit plan, and $80 a month for more. I mean, it's pretty simple economics, isn't it? If you want a better grade service, then you need to pay for it.
If you've got an economics degree, I think you should go back.
Mr. Patton, can I just hold you up? I do have an economics degree.
You asked me a question.
Incredibly pejorative.
You asked me a question. Let me answer the question.
Well, stop sledging me, dude.
Two separate things, sir. We are talking about two separate things. Yes, you pay more if you want faster broadband. Yes, there are various tiers. What we're talking about here is a requirement that some people who are unlucky to get fibre to the node now have to pay an extra fee. They pay a special fee, a special loading. So they're not paying for extra broadband capacity. They're being asked to pay for the upgrade of their inferior copper wire to fibre, which is precisely what Bill Morrow was talking about and precisely what the Minister has outlined.
Mr. Patton, let's keep going. You also said if there was any doubt that this is an election move, Fletcher specifically pointed out the benefits for rural and regional customers. This includes a $300 million allocation targeted at much criticised rollout in the bush. Many of the millions of Australians struggling with slow and unreliable broadband connections live in highly contestable rural seats held by increasingly nervous National Party MPs. Mr. Patton, do you accept that this fund, the $300 million co-investment fund, will be overseen by the board and management of NBN Co and the Australian Broadband Advisory Council to determine how this investment is best spent to serve regional Australia? Do you accept that? And do you accept then, therefore, your suggestion that this fund will be used for political gain is misguided, wrong, and quite frankly, offensive?
You're a very, very good verbler. I never said any of that.
So you don't accept that you said what I have indicated to you?
I missed a little bit of what you said, but I don't know really what tree you're barking up. What I said was that is an election and there are people in National Party seats who are worried about the impact of the broadband network. And I draw you to the report from this very committee in which the National Party member of the day voted with the other members in order to effectively recommend that the government instruct NBN Co to move from copper to fibre. I mean, are you telling me that you're, for the record, are you telling the people of Australia, and particularly your National Party colleagues, that you're happy with the National Broadband Network rollout in the bush?
Mr. Patton, it's not for me to answer questions. I get the privilege of asking them, and I just want to be fair. I want to be fair to you because you said you didn't hear what I said, so I'm going to repeat it. Perhaps put your hand up if at any point you don't hear me. You have, in addition to what I said earlier about in terms of your blog, you have said if there was any doubt that this is an election move, Fletcher specifically pointed out the benefits for rural and regional customers. This includes a $300 million allocation targeted at the much criticised rollout in the bush. Many of the millions of Australians struggling with slow and unreliable broadband connections live in highly contestable rural seats held by increasingly nervous National Party MPs. My question is a simple one. Do you accept that the $300 million co-investment fund that has been announced by the Minister, A, is to be overseen by the board and management of NBN Co and the Australian Broadband Advisory Council? And if you accept those things, any suggestion that
I absolutely accept that.
You accept that?
I absolutely accept
Okay,
that.
so
What's the problem is?
well, I'm going to ask you the next thing. Do you accept that any suggestion that this is in somehow politicised is ill-advised and wrong?
Sorry, what was that? I missed that bit. Sorry again.
In light of the fact that this fund will be overseen by the management and board of NBN Co and the Australian Broadband Advisory Council, any suggestion that this fund is being used for a political advantage or is in any way being politicised is just wrong, isn't it? Because it's in the hands of independent third parties.
I've been around a long time, Chairman. You're a classic burbler. I never said any of that.
No, I'm asking you, do you accept that that is not the case? And it can't.
Of course.
Good.
But stop burbling me. You did it at the last meeting, except I wasn't there, and now you want to do it again.
Mr. Patton, I'm putting questions to you. If I wanted to verbal you, I wouldn't give you an opportunity to respond. Can I ask Mr. Connolly if he's got anything he wishes to add?
Nothing from me, thanks, Chair.
Well, I've got just a little bit more. Mr. Patton, you said earlier that you claimed that the cost of the fibre to the premises rollout is effectively twice the cost of what it could have been. There's no basis for that assertion, is there?
Yes, the evidence given by the representatives from New Zealand who spoke to this committee several years ago. It's on the record.
So if Australia was the same size as New Zealand, had the same population, the same topography, was effectively New Zealand too, then we could expect the same sort of costs in terms of a rollout, couldn't we?
Well, they might not be exactly the same, but I come back. I think you're.
No, we're not.
You're going to let me talk, or you're going to keep interrupting? Just listen to me. It's very simple, sir. We are a very large country. The vast proportion of the country is being serviced with an NBN via satellite or fixed wireless. And in the areas that are considered to be viable for a fixed line service, then there is no reason to accept that we could not roll out a fibre network for roughly the same cost as New Zealand on a per premises basis, not on a total basis, on a per premises basis. This is economics 101.
Mr. Patton, I was just ask you about the New Zealand pipe and pit arrangement, but Mr. Connolly's asked respectfully if he could do that too, so I'm going to hand over to Mr. Connolly.
Yeah, yep. Thanks for that, Chair. Yeah, Mr. Patton, I was just reflecting on the comparison that we heard a little bit about between the rollout here in Australia and in New Zealand. My understanding is that in New Zealand, the authority there has access to the pits and pipes which are in place, whereas in Australia we are locked into an agreement where we need to pay Telstra for access to those pits and pipes. I haven't got the figures, but I understand that that's a significant significant
about
cost
$1 billion.
difference.
About $1 billion. Your chairman's researcher hasn't done their research, or he'd be asking about the article in New Daily this week. And I refer you to that article. Yes, look, one of the biggest mistakes in the multi-technology mix was the fact that we allowed Telstra to take us to the cleaners. And I should just say, for the record, and I've said this a number of times and in articles, you can't blame David Thodey for seeing Christmas come early when the government wanted to buy his old copper wire networks, and you cannot blame Andy Penn for wanting to buy the NBN now that it's almost complete for a substantial discount. The reality is that the NBN pays Telstra about $1 billion a year for its pipes and its copper wires. The deal that was originally done was a much better deal.
So would you accept that would inherently then contribute to a very large cost differential between what Australia has paid and is paying compared to New Zealand?
Yes.
All right. Thank you for that.
Can I ask a further question in relation to that? I think your term, Mr. Patton, was took us to the cleaners. By us, I take it you mean the former Labor government that signed us up to those definitive agreements, correct?
No, I mean the people of Australia.
Which government made the decision to, quote, sell us to the cleaners?
To what, sorry?
Which government made the decision signing us up to the definitive agreements that you were just criticising, Mr. Patton?
There are two different sets. You'll need to be specific as to which one you're talking about. They're quite different.
Mr. Patton, in relation to the definitive agreement in terms of using the Telstra network, who signed us up to that definitive agreement?
The deal that pays Telstra $1 billion a year was signed by Minister Turnbull.
Mr. Patton, you're being effusive with respect. You know exactly what I'm asking. In terms of the agreements that were struck definitively to put us on this course, it was Minister Conroy and the former Labor government, correct?
No, not at all. I think you're misinformed, and I'd suggest that you perhaps talk to NBN Co. They can set you straight. There are two different agreements we're talking about, and
We've lost you, Mr. Patton. You might be being fact-checked. Do we have you, Mr. Patton? Madam Secretary, we'll give it a minute to reconnect.
Otherwise, Chair, we may ask him to phone in on telecon.
Or we could just end the hearing. Doesn't worry me too much. We're pretty close to time.
Okay.
We'll just wait. Mr. Patton, do we have you?
While we're waiting, Chair, can I just make the point? You've been making a lot of points about New Zealand. New Zealand reduced FTTP costs by 44%, as did Verizon in the US. British Telecom materially reduced the cost of FTTP in deployment trials. The point being that if you stick with FTTP and make business as usual, price improvements, the cost does come down. So if I can just get that in there, I'll just be helpful to the committee.
Sure, but with respect, someone who represents an electorate a quarter of the size of New Zealand, I get a little when people seek to use it as a comparison in terms of the challenges we face in regional Australia, mate.
We do face many challenges in regional Australia, as we both know, Chair. I think, but some parallels can be drawn. And I think
I think it's actually I think it's misleading, to be honest, because in addition to everything else, they can use incumbent infrastructure. We can't. But anyway, let's move on. We'll have a discussion about that in private session, no doubt.
No.
Madam Secretary, I think we're at the point where I might conclude today's hearing. We can perhaps write to Mr. Patton and indicate the connection was lost.
Yes, Chair.
Colleagues, that concludes today's proceedings. I thank all witnesses for their evidence. I also want to thank Hansard and Broadcasting and, of course, Secretary for their assistance. I declare this hearing adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.